To start the official proceedings, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on Shire country, of which the members and elders of the Shire community and their forebears have been custodians for many centuries and have performed age-old ceremonies of celebration, initiation and renewal. We acknowledge their living culture and their unique role in the life of this region. Council meetings are audio and video recorded and are made available to the public via electronic media, including YouTube. So they'll be filming us, but they'll be hearing you, they won't see you. Councillors, all councillors are present. There's a seat up the front. So no apologies, councillors. Any declarations of interest or conflict of interest? No declarations, thank you. So we have 2 sets of minutes to approve. There's a seat up the front, sir.
Great, thank you.
We have 2 sets of minutes to approve and we have a recommendation. Do I have a motion?
Yes, Mayor, I recommend that the minutes of the special and ordinary meetings of the Mount Alexander Shire Council held on the 21st of May 2019 be referred to the minutes.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Petrusma, thank you. Any concerns, objections? No. I declare the motion carried. Thank you. Before we move on to public question time, I'd like to acknowledge some very sad news in that David Stratton has passed away. He's been instrumental in doing a lot of work in our town and around our region and elsewhere on disability access, as well as being a good friend to many. And so it's very sad to report him as now having passed on. So thank you. Councillors, we're moving on to public question time. Do I have a motion to suspend standing orders? So thank you, Councillor Neiman. Seconded, Councillor Petrusma. Thank you. So we'll now ask for questions, and the order in which I'll do things is I will ask for all matters to do with planning first, and I'll go through them in order that we have them in our agenda papers. So I'll ask for any questions about the first one from the objectors, then the applicant, then the second one, and so on. And then I will ask for any questions not related to planning issues. You will have 3 minutes, and I've been asked whether I would extend that for one particular person, but the answer to that is no. You have 3 minutes to speak. And in so doing, we will listen with respect, and we're fully confident you'll also speak to us with respect, and we will not allow comments around things that are confidential or contractual or personal to be said in this chamber. I'll have to ask you to stop. So, our first planning application is planning permit application 234/2018, use and development of the land for an animal boarding facility at 9 East Langley Road, Langley. Now I think we're probably going to have quite a few comments about this. Can you put up your hand, please, if you wish to make a comment? Right, thank you. Is the applicant here? Thank you. So what we might do is have the objectors and then the applicant, and I'm just hoping that the objectors, you're not going to repeat the same thing that everyone else is, so if you could be a bit coordinated around that, that would be grand. So, who wishes to speak first? Sir, come up. When you do, if you could state your name. Yes, sorry, stand there. State your name and who you represent, if you represent anyone. Thank you.
Yes, well, my name is Chris Bannon, and I work for a firm called Bannon Consultants, which is a town planning consultancy, and I'm here today to represent Lynn and Mark Bond, who are objectors to this proposal. Now I've got some notes about what I'm going to say, and if that's in order, I'll hand them out when I've finished making my comments. Now, this proposal allows for up to 36 dogs in a dog boarding kennel. There are a variety of documents that are relevant to such a land use, and these include the Council Planning Scheme, the EPA Guideline for Control of Noise in Country Victoria, and the Code of Practice for Boarding Establishments. The applicant's application material is voluminous, but it's very short on precise detail, in my opinion. We provided a detailed 8-page submission summarising what we saw as these deficiencies, and the suggested permit conditions are an attempt to overcome these deficiencies. Now, it's interesting that there are 5 pages of these permit conditions. The trouble, I say, with this approach is that once the permit is granted, the issue then becomes one of ensuring compliance. It is better, I believe, to suggest a reasonable level of detail be provided prior to any permit issuing. The permit applicant has not taken the opportunity to do that. There's been plenty of time since objections were lodged on this application until the present time, and there's been no changes that I'm aware of to the application material. Now, the officer's report quotes a VCAT case where the tribunal indicated that the provision of further details in the issue of the permit was appropriate. And there are several other VCAT cases where the reverse has been the case. From a planning perspective, it's really a matter of how complete the application is and whether it can reasonably be addressed, or any deficiencies can reasonably addressed by permit conditions. I say it's not in this case. It's my view that this application is not preparable by permit conditions. This is supported to some degree by the number of permit conditions that are suggested. Now, the next point I want to make is an issue about the EPA guidelines. Now, these guidelines recommend that there be a 500-metre distance from dog boarding kennels to the nearest residential area.
You've got 10 seconds.
Right. Well, the matter that has been addressed in the officer's report is that doesn't apply to farming zones because they're not residential. Now, I've got several other matters that I want to say which I haven't got to, so can I pass these notes?
Yes, please.
Right? Thank you.
Thanks.
There's probably spare ones there, but
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Who wishes to speak second on this issue? Thank you. Person with their hand up. And if I can't see you, Councillor Trusma, can you just make sure I'm picking up anyone who puts it behind? She's trying. Can you get one of Sheire's pencils? Yep.
Good evening, my name is Lynn Bond, and I am an objector who is, my house is directly to the west of the proposed dog boarding kennels, and my bedroom window is 240 metres from the proposed dog boarding kennels. Firstly, I'd like to expand on the issue of noise and the acoustic report. The EPA guidelines of 500 metres is entirely applicable in this situation. There are numerous VCAT decisions that apply the 500 metre zone in their decision making regardless of the planning zone. When dog kennels are being built closer than 500 metres in residential areas, and that means where there's houses not zoned residential, sufficient controls must be in place to ensure adherence to the EPA noise guidelines. The onus is on the applicant to provide enough detail in their application for this assessment to be made. The decision by planning to accept the proposed controls in the current application recommended by the applicant's acoustic consultant is dismissive of a robust secondary acoustic report produced by Frank Butera from the Arup Group. Frank is a highly respected expert witness at VCAT and a lecturer in acoustics at Monash University. His brief was to produce an independent technical assessment of the applicant's acoustic report. Regardless of whether it was in our favour, his findings were that the report produced by Audiometric and Acoustic Services was seriously flawed, and the EPA noise levels would be exceeded by 150%, regardless of animal management techniques. This information was omitted in the planner's report. The next point I would like to make is that this planning recommendation completely ignores my current and future use of my land. We have invested a considerable amount of money developing our property into a boutique equestrian centre. We are only at stage 1 at the moment. Currently I offer short-term agistment and clinics and lessons on my menage. In stage 2, I plan to build an indoor arena and offer full training and boarding facilities, as well as breeding high-level dressage horses. I've been working with horses for 50 years and I consider myself an expert witness. Horses are fear and flight animals and dogs are perceived as predators. The fact that the dog runs that are attached to the kennels and the exercise yards have no acoustic treatment is a real issue. If a horse can hear a threat but can't see it, they react even more unpredictably. I consider a dog boarding kennel to be of great detriment to the viable future of my business. The economic value that I currently bring to the Shire through my activities through horse supplies, veterinary services, etc. is being completely ignored. The equine industry is the biggest employer in Victoria. If this proposal goes ahead, we may be forced to move our business to another Shire where there is more protection for our safety. For our industry, sorry. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Person, thank you.
My name is Mark Bond. I obviously live next door. I'd like to bring up the issue of groundwater in relation to this planning application. Yesterday I read everything whilst planning for this meeting, and I noticed there was no mention on the plans or in the written documentation of a stock and domestic bore on the applicant's property. I then spoke to Golden Murray Water and confirmed that a bore existed on their property, but they had not been informed of the bore's presence in relation to this application. They have since sent a revised report to the planning department, I believe. Why is this important? If I was to use my stock and domestic bore for commercial gain, I would need a permit and a water entitlement. This has not been addressed. Furthermore, there are minimum setbacks required for wastewater systems in relation to a bore. The bore's location is not marked on any plans. So therefore, what are the plans? This is just another example of a planning application that is totally lacking in detail and due diligence. Secondly, I've been working in the building and construction industry for the past 30 years. I do have experience with most building materials. The big issue with this application is whether the proposed kennel construction comply with the EPA noise standards. My bedroom window is approximately 200 metres from the proposed kennel, so noise is a major issue. In my experience, the brief details of the recommended building materials to be used in an acoustic treatment are not much better than what is used in basic house construction. The big issue is there is no mention of the use of an independent, unbiased acoustic engineering certification. The planning department is relying solely on the applicant's friendly acoustic consultant, who is working for the applicant as the basis for the acoustic treatments of the kennels. This is not a level playing field, nor is this a transparent process. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. My name is Thomas Bond. I live within 250 metres of this proposed thing I'm obviously objecting. I'd like to discuss the planning condition that requires the applicant to undertake an acoustic assessment 12 months after the kennels have been built. Our acoustic expert commented that this was not best practice from a planning perspective because you are dealing with an irregular noise source. How do you ensure that during any given time period the kennels are fully occupied and that the worst case scenario is being measured? There may only be 5 quiet dogs residing in the kennel at that time. This is why acoustic best practice relies on databases from worst case scenarios or predictive monitoring. This is what was used by our expert, and this has been tested numerous times during VCAT decisions. The applicant's submission and their acoustic consultant heavily rely upon animal husbandry as the primary means of ensuring control. Now, this is a direct quote from the applicant's acoustic report, and I quote, "We anticipate that those who peruse this report will identify that much of the proposals revolve around common sense even more than the science of acoustics. Also," and I quote, "it must be noted that our past experience of compliance is more often dependent upon the application of basic animal husbandry techniques than the acoustic construction, which is a secondary factor." Now, from a planning perspective, this is not best practice. The problem is that the planning permit is attached to this property. We're not questioning whether the applicant can handle dogs, but what happens if the property is sold? The planning application must ensure that the acoustic construction is the primary consideration, and the application in its current form with external dog runs and minimal acoustic treatment will not adhere to the EPA noise guidelines. Now, with what time I've got left, I'd like to read some comments from Ingo and Romy Shook, who live up on Manns Road, some 500 metres away. They were not, unfortunately, able to be here tonight with us. They say as follows. "Firstly, please accept my apologies for not being able to attend tonight's council meeting. Another kangaroo strike has trashed the front of my car, all held together with tape until repairs. Short dry trips only. Nevertheless, back to the subject. I was disappointed to hear of the planning officer's recommendation to issue a permit for the dog kennels in Langley. My concerns in regard to this naively optimistic project have been made abundantly clear in my letter of objection, and I do not intend to reiterate them here. However, my understanding is that the planning officer's recommendation was made on the basis of the land being zoned as farming, and apparently not forming a balanced view by not considering all reports, particularly acoustic studies. According to rates notices, my property and other affected properties are described as being residential rural lifestyle. Unless I'm missing something, you can't have it both ways. And the application has been assessed on an incorrect premise. The properties are clearly lifestyle in nature and small in size, certainly not broadacre farms providing primary sources of incomes. In that context, the proposed kennels have a real and significant impact not only on lifestyle, but on property values. Again, apologies for missing the council meeting, and I've authorised Lynette and Thomas Bond to read this notice in my absence. Regards, Ingo and Romney Shook. Thank you, councillors. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Him? Okay.
No.
Let me talk first and then.
Yeah, just no problem.
Thanks. Councillor Gardner just wishes to clarify something before we go on. Thanks.
Phil, I believe it's you. Sorry.
Still
That issue around farm zone and on rates notice, I've heard a couple of times. Is there anything you can say on that?
I can't comment on the rate notice. I'll take that on notice and we'll look into that tomorrow. But certainly the zoning I can confirm is farm zoning under the Mount Alexander planning scheme.
Excuse me, I do have a copy of the rates notice, if you'd like to see it.
No, believe you.
Thank you. Next question.
Good evening, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Stephen McKinley, and I'm here tonight to voice my objection to the proposed dog kennel. I live at 210 Manns Road, which is approximately 800 metres west of the site. The topography and lack of trees between us is such that noise will be clearly heard from our place. We already hear the noise from the traffic along the Kyneton Heathcote Road, as well as dog barking coming from the vicinity of the proposed site. This area has moved away from traditional farming in recent decades and is now a small residential community, which is in line with the description in our rates notice, residential rural lifestyle. And those people living there do so with the expectation that a quiet and relaxed lifestyle, and placing a noisy dog boarding kennel smack in the middle of it would most certainly destroy it. And another concern I have is the negative impact on the resale value of our property. I mean, let's face it, who's going to want to buy into a place that has 36 barking and howling dogs over the back fence? Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
Good evening. My name's Jeff Darman. Bronwyn and I purchased 12 acres on 109 East Metcalfe Langley Road in 2016 as a place to retire once we'd extracted ourselves from work and family commitments in Melbourne. We love the tranquility of the immediate area and its residential setting. We currently manage a few days a week on our property and hoping to relocate there in the next 2 years. The proposed development of the dog kennels at 9 East Metcalfe Langley Road is 800 metres from our property. The development has caused us to question our relocation to the area, and the outcome of your decision may cause us to revisit our permanent residency in the Shire. Our primary concern is that of the constant noise the development will cause. We believe the planners have not given adequate consideration to the loss of amenity the surrounding residents will suffer. We particularly wish to draw your attention to the following. The placement of the dog kennels and the exercise yards, with proximity to the well-travelled and increasingly noisy Heath Kyneton Road, will agitate the animals and likely to increase the noise. The Council's efforts to mitigate noise by limiting the number of dogs to 5 in one session in the exercise area means that if 36 dogs are in residence and the dogs are exercised for 30 minutes twice a day, that the dogs will be in the exercise yard for a minimum of 7 hours per day. Once they're in the exercise yard, they're even more vulnerable to the noise emanating from Kyneton Heathcote Road. So we find that to be a constant noise. We anticipate that to be a constant noise. The planning response indicates that the noises from this development the noise that will be emitted from this development bears no resemblance to the traditional noise from the influence of farming the planning report suggests we should expect in the zone. In fact, the noise of constant barking is quite distinct from that of agricultural equipment or farm animals. As has been mentioned, the planners have requested a 1-week noise monitoring report be commissioned after the development is operational. The planners have also suggested that the developer would need to take remedial action if the noise exceeded the EPA levels at that time. I suppose I would ask now that what is remedial action that would be taken if in respect to the exercise yards if the EPA requirements were exceeded. I'm not a noise expert, but I know that noise travels, and the current road noise can be heard clearly from our home. There is no doubt that the proposed development will cause loss of amenity to our family. I hope that you will vote to refuse this application for the benefit of the Langley community, or at least mandate the entire exercise yards in their entirety be enclosed in an appropriately acoustically designed structure, including a roof. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is this on this application?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name is Joan Jones and I live in East Metcalfe Langley Road, where I have lived for the past 29 and a half years. We really cherish our lifestyle and we moved there because we wanted the rural lifestyle. When we moved there, we purchased the land. It was originally under the Shire of Metcalfe and it was zoned residential. Sometime after this, it has changed to farming. I feel if we realised when we purchased our land that the goalposts may move at some stage, we would really consider our move. We moved from Melbourne to enjoy a quiet rural lifestyle. We've raised our children there. We live approximately just under 1 kilometre from the proposed development, but like other people have said, the noise really travels. We can actually hear the noise from the railway line and the trains going, which are more than 10 kilometres away. We are on the top of a hill and the noise travels. All properties within the proposal are very small. They're ranging from 4 hectares to 24 hectares, which is not, as I understood it, the 40 hectares prescribed as in farming zone. We are also concerned about the noise. In the report presented by the applicant, the noise level presented in tables 6, 7 and 8 suggests that noise levels are within the recommended levels. However, the noise levels were based on 8 dogs, not 36 dogs. So this information needs to be totally regarded and is irrelevant to this application. I really value my lifestyle. We put up with some other things. I travel 90 kilometres each way to work because I love driving home in my gate every night and enjoying the tranquility of the weekends. And I hope that this is not going to be destroyed. So please consider the residents of this very close community, which is a little rural hamlet stuck in the middle of a farming zone. Thank you for this opportunity.
Anyone else wish to speak against the proposal?
Thank you. My name's Enzo Perello. I live at 191 Mans Road in Langley. My wife, who's a local veterinarian, and I moved to the area just over 1 year ago. And we moved to the region and were attracted to the region because of the quiet rural living lifestyle of the region. We are concerned primarily with the noise amenity issues that have been raised, particularly the properties that will be affected within a 500 metre zone of the proposed dog boarding kennel. There are 4 houses within that zone. One home is within 250 metres. And we're particularly concerned not only with those noise issues, but the potential impact of those issues on neighbouring businesses. We've heard about the local equestrian business that Lynn Bond has established at the property adjacent, and we're particularly concerned by the distress that may be caused to those horses. And this is an issue not only for animal welfare, but also for the safety of the people who might be riding those horses. Just in closing, I'd really urge you to consider these noise amenity issues, their impact on the quiet lifestyle of this community, the people who are attracted to live there, particularly people who have been there for many years before the region was rezoned. And also the impact of that noise on neighbouring businesses that have been established with significant investment over a long period of time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Adam Cusack. My wife and I, Donna, moved to the area 3.5 years ago for a nice, peaceful retirement. We bought a property which runs adjacent to the proposed development. I have a dam which is 50 metres from the development, and I think our bedroom is 260 metres from the proposed kennel. Our plan was to live there, raise stock, and live on the land. We've got considerable trees, fauna, and we have a great lifestyle. Since the quarry was reopened, the road noise is significant, and without a doubt it affects our dogs. 2-3 nights ago, Our neighbours' dogs were going ballistic, and it can only be attributed to the noise on the roads. One of the issues we have is we primarily raise all of our water from a bore, and we use that bore as our drinking water. We use our dam to feed stock. We adjust horses with our neighbour that is also adjacent. Our concern is, because we've attended the Victorian Farmers Federation Stock Sense seminars, we're really concerned about biosecurity and having so many animals that will be difficult to be tracked coming in and out of the property adjacent to us once we populate it with the stock that we intend to put in those paddocks. Some of the things that can travel up to 500 kilometres with animals that are brought in from other properties significant in any farming situation. Anyone that's a farmer will be aware of things like foot and mouth disease and that sort of thing. I'm not suggesting that is able to be transferred by dogs, but when animals are travelling from one property to another, they do carry disease. So if we're going to have that many animals adjacent to our property that aren't properly screened, that's a major concern for us, and it will significantly impact what we do with our property in the future. We're not intending on leaving this property, so we will fight this. We'll fight it and we will monitor it because we are so close to the property that are intending to have a dog kennel. Look, everyone else has spoken about the noise, but when Lynn's out training her horses, we don't take our dogs into the paddocks. It's just common sense, because our dogs barking will upset her horses. There are significant injuries that happen from people with startled horses in the area, and even our vet was winged for a good 6 months. She had broken the collarbone and that sort of thing, and it was on a startled horse she was thrown from the horse and she hit a fence. So these are significant things to worry about, and that's all I've got to say. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Any other? You've already spoken, sir.
No.
No.
That was me.
We look alike, yeah. You had me fooled, and thank you for that. Sorry about that.
Are you alright? Good evening, councillors. My name is Jake Bond. I live in the property adjacent to the proposed development. So my opening statement is that we bought a 20-acre block that was in land zone farmland. A planning permit was issued to build a house in land that was under 100 acres, which is usually not allowed in area zone farmland. So by way of this, it suggests that by the way the planning permit has been allowed, and then the way we get charged rates is under the ABPCC 117, which is Rural Lifestyle Residential Living, under which the residential amenity comes before any commercial interests. To continue, I look around this room, I don't see a group of individuals, I see a community of people, and this is the tension that lies at the core of this dispute, which is individual ambition versus the values of a community. And so tonight as councillors, you will decide whether the economic ambitions of individuals will outweigh the desire of a community to maintain the amenity of our lifestyle. I'd like to reference section 208B of the Local Government Act 1989, which outlines the best value principles which dictate the way in which local government should function. Section 208B states that, quote, all services provided by a council must be responsive to the community, end quote, and it is supported further by section 3C2E, which ensures resources are used best to meet the needs of the local community. The predominance of community needs within the legislation is further demonstrated by section 3C2E, which states that all council decisions should improve the overall quality of life of the community. The application before the council has received 43 objections against it. This suite of objections encompasses almost every stakeholder in the Langley community, and therefore it's highly representative of the community's needs. The main need in question refers to our right to quiet enjoyment of property and the preservation of our rural lifestyle. The amenity of this rural lifestyle is characteristic of the Langley locality and of utmost significance to the appeal and value of the area we live in. Therefore, it is crucial that we move to protect and preserve it. Ultimately, as outlined by the speakers before me and supported by the plethora of objections before the Council, the proposed development stands in contradiction to the quality of life of the Langley community. It is this quality of life that we are here trying to protect, and it is a quality of life that is protected by the 1989 Local Government Act. Thank you for your time.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak against this one? Thank you. Before I ask for the applicants to have their comment, councillors, I need a motion to suspend standing orders for another half hour. Thank you. So Councillor Petrusma, Councillor Neiman. Thank you. Would the applicants like to speak?
Mayor Machin and councillors, I'm Ian Brownlee, an applicant for the Langley Dog Hotel. There is some modest farming activity takes place on our land. In isolation, it's hard to imagine the real value of this activity, and it certainly doesn't support us financially, but it does help a local sheep farmer feed his stock at this time of year, and we add to the Australian alpaca fleece clip. No single farm supplies the whole world with produce, no matter the scale of the farm. It requires the contribution of the many to meet the needs of the many. Animal boarding has been defined as agricultural activity for a reason. The people who developed and continue to develop the planning scheme are no slouches. They've created a clear, unambiguous set of rules that dictate what you can do, where you can do it, and how it should be done. Using the insight of the planning scheme creators, you, as the decision makers, have an opportunity to take a modest 20-acre holding capable of producing a small hay cart and a bale of fleece, a hobby farm perhaps to the critics, and give it the commercial potential of many hundreds of acres. This proposal is unique, a first for the state, catering entirely to the top end of the market. No other boarding establishment is fully dedicated to the top end, as we will be. We understand the boarding kennel stereotype. It's noisy and distressing. We also understand the objections to this proposal if the stereotype is all that the objectors have ever experienced. But there is another way. The success of this project centres on several core principles. No interaction between unfamiliar dogs, removal of visual stimuli, comfortable, relaxed and quiet conditions, a safe, low anxiety environment, intelligent management, and an entirely acoustically rated building. We've looked at facilities around the country and overseas. We've consulted and drawn on the experience of seeing the worst and best to design this proposal. The building is state of the art. The sleeping quarters are bedrooms, as anyone in this room tonight would recognise a bedroom, fully lined, decorated and detailed. We'll provide an environment that's as close to home as can be created. The service and care will be first class, 5-star. The presentation of the facility will match the expectations of 5-star, and 5-star means the best there is. We'll be living and working this project and do everything to encourage happy, easy to manage, quiet guests. And why wouldn't we? There's no question that the greatest risk this development is being, there's no question that the greatest risk of this development is being a noisy pain in the butt for everybody. We live less than 40 metres away, so if it's noisy, we'll be most affected. NIRV is clear and simple, and will happily submit to monitoring to confirm compliance. Council can be reassured that a noise issue, if it exists, can be measured and dealt with at a legal level. Some of you have seen details of the business model and projected figures. The Planning Department's report shows the proposal aligns with all of the requirements of the planning scheme, and this clearly demonstrates the risks of the proposal are low, but the potential rewards for the Shire are high. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Machin and councillors, good evening. I'm Janet Brownlee, one of the applicants for the Langley Dog Hotel. There is another side to this which goes beyond dogs, horses and self-interest. An opportunity which, on its own, will make little difference on a world scale, but should be considered as a contribution, a bit like the alpaca fleece and hay. To provide some background, I spent some years as a manager of a job network agency working with highly disadvantaged job seekers. This involved a very high caseload of youth and women returning to work. The major barriers to these groups obtaining employment were lack of formal qualifications and, of course, experience. One of my roles was to engage with employers and to work towards creating opportunities for employment with these job seekers. I would constantly be faced with the need to overcome the obstacle with employer groups of their preconception of the unemployed and the hurdles of lack of experience and qualifications. Getting employers on board was a major hurdle. At the time, my husband Ian was a manager at a large thoroughbred horse stud and training facility and would frequently be looking for staff to work in low-skilled positions. Working with support and providing the opportunity, together we successively achieved outcomes for a number of people. To have the opportunity for a workplace to take on these groups was a major win. The government website, Job Outlook, advises that around half the people employed in the animal attendance sector have not completed any post-school qualifications. At best, they completed year 10, 11 or 12. To work as an animal attendant usually requires a Certificate 3, including 2 years on-the-job training. Government figures show that of those currently working with animals, around 3/4 are female, of which 1/4 are under 25 years of age. The Victorian workforce equates to over 24% of this sector nationally, with the number of animal attendants expected to grow strongly over the next 5 years. There are likely to be around 12,000 job openings over the next 5 years, about 2,400 a year. Youth unemployment in the Greater Bendigo area is currently running at a horrendous 18.3%, the highest in the state, as compared with the national youth unemployment rate of just over 11% and general unemployment level of 5.31% for the region. If we provide the opportunity for the training and experience for these individuals, they can carry it to a growing industry with good long-term prospects. The government's own website says that people who work in this sector are less likely to be unemployed than others. We will be employing people to help run our facility and we will train them. The point of all of this is that our proposal is in one of the industry sectors most capable of making a contribution to the training and employment of some of the most disadvantaged job seekers. Opportunities like this should be grasped by governments at every level with both hands. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Julie Lancashire. I'm a town planning consultant representing Janet and Ian Brownlee in this matter. As you're aware, Janet and Ian have lodged a robust and detailed application demonstrating just how seriously they take their proposal and the relevant considerations by Council. They've worked closely with Council officers throughout this process, and despite the application being well outside the statutory time frame afforded Council, they've chosen to continue to work with Council to achieve a mutually acceptable outcome. And given the time allowed to speak, I'll focus on just a few key issues. The farming zone and uses. The proposed use is permissible within the zone and furthermore is included within the definition of agriculture in the planning scheme. Although the subject site is only 8 hectares in area, it contributes already in a substantial way to the local agricultural economy with the production of hay and alpaca wool. The addition of the dog boarding facility, not just any dog boarding facility, but a dog hotel, as described by my client, will further generate income for the local agricultural economy. With respect to noise, the EPA publication 1254 Noise Control Guidelines is just that. It's a guideline document only and is not incorporated into the planning scheme. The 500 metre separation distance referred to in this document is from residential areas, and the nearest residential area to my client's proposal is some 10 kilometres to the south. When I say residential area, I'm describing the nearest residential zone. The subject site and surrounds are in a farming zone, So a different amenity should be anticipated with respect to emissions such as dust, odour and noise than in a residential zone where there are different amenity expectations. Regardless, however, it's reasonable to take measures to minimise the potential for excessive emissions such as noise. And in that regard, my client engaged an acoustic consultant to take a report and is happy to adopt the recommendations, all of the recommendations provided in that advice. The EPA has reviewed this advice and is comfortable that any noise impacts can be managed in accordance with the NIRV, so the Noise from Industry and Regional Victoria Standard. With respect to the merits of the proposal, it's well sited, well set back from boundaries and screened by either the existing dwelling and outbuilding or stands of planted vegetation. The only vegetation being removed is planted and or exotic. The built form has been designed to deliberately avoid visual stimuli between dogs unknown to each other. All of the noise attenuation methods recommended by the acoustic report will be adopted and can be facilitated by a conditional planning permit. The use provides local employment and training opportunities in a boutique and growing industry, and the use will help to foster local tourism opportunities as visitors to this region can leave their dog or dogs at the facility and then travel on to nearby destinations. And as referred earlier, of course, it contributes to the local agricultural economy. So in conclusion, the proposal is 10 kilometres away from the nearest residential area. The proposal incorporated all of the recommendations of the acoustic report. It's a legitimate use within the farming zone. The extensive proposed planning permit conditions, although as Mr Bannon was saying, that he was referring to the 5 pages, it's not unusual to have 22 or more conditions. We'll ensure that it's operated in a satisfactory way. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for listening.
I'm going to draw a line under that planning application now and take questions in relation to planning permit application 203-2003 at 34 Johnson Street, Castlemaine. Are there any? Thank you, Mr. Ryan. So you're speaking on behalf of the applicant?
I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant, so
is there anyone who wishes to speak against this recommendation? No? Okay, Mr. Ryan. Just before you start, Mr. Ryan. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, councillors. My name's George Ryan. I'm a solicitor working in planning law, probably known to many of the councillors, and I would like to speak on behalf of the permit, on behalf of the applicant for this extension of his permit. The request is for an extension of the permit. It's not an application for a new permit, and different provisions apply in that case. Sadly, I have to say that the officer's report made available to you does not give an accurate and fair account of the issues involved in this matter. The applicant has a right to seek an extension of a permit under section 69 without in fact going back to the start and ticking every one of the planning boxes that would be needed for a new application. Technically the permit started in 2004, not 2003. The applicant in fact immediately struck problems with a nuisance next door that required him to go to VCAT and have enforcement proceedings upheld. And that took until 2006 to solve. That nuisance involving large amounts of dust and compost smells permeating the area of Johnson Street was a major issue that he was successful in overcoming. Soon after that, it was found necessary by the building surveyors that he had to have in fact amended plans. And so he had to go through a process costing him $7,000 to get amended plans built for the development. And the council officers should have been able to point to those plans dated 2009. So really this development didn't start 15 years ago. At the very earliest, it started 10 years ago. Subsequent to that, he ran into further difficulties. I've summarised those fairly briefly in the correspondence which is on which the officers have included in their file. That include, for example, changes to the building law that prevented him from continuing to act as a owner-builder in the matter, and required him to find a registered builder that would take on the project.
He now actually has a registered builder signed up for that purpose. It is true he has not had a building permit for the period that's been suggested in the report, but it's because of the difficulty of getting one. The council has made know of other examples of such a case. The council officer's report says nothing has happened on site since 2013. This is plainly incorrect. Mr. Spicer invited the council to look at a pile of documents showing the works that he's been doing, and I've prepared a summary of those for you, which I'll hand up at the end, together with photographs. I listed 20 items that he's been working on, including building the buttresses that will carry the verandas on the units, brick paving inside the premises, trenching for services and laying of services up to the building site, buying and purchasing timber, bricks, matching corrugated iron for the verandas, etc., etc. The council officer's report also refers to a decision in Cantor and the Shire of Murrumbidgee, and refers to one test provided by that case.
Yes,
in fact,
Mr. Ryan, you're at the end of your time.
well, can I hand up the rest of the documents, which refers to the Cantor case?
Thank you.
Sorry, I had a question.
Yes.
And we're going to see the documents, I think. So, in terms of the trenching for the utilities you're talking
Yes.
about, when did that occur?
That occurred about 4 years ago, 4 to 5 years ago. Yes, between 4 to 5 years ago, and I've got a photograph of the trench in Golden Street showing opened up for that purpose.
So Mr. Yuzovic, I've been told to say Phil,
Would that constitute a commencement of building?
So typically in a planning, typically in a planning permit there's two requirements. One is when to start by, and then once a planning permit has been, or works subject to a planning permit have commenced, there's an end date that works must be completed by a certain date. So without seeing the photos and the further details, having some trenching and suggesting that that's commencement of works, I'd have to be convinced, especially if they occurred 4 or 5 years ago and no further work was undertaken.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan.
So there's an attachment which refers to the works being done. There's the photographs of those works here, with attached documentation referring to building permits and bushfire plans being obtained, etc. And then there is attached to that.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan.
I'm just saying what's there.
Yeah, I know. You're actually. Thank you. Thank you.
There's one of each of the councillors on that.
Thank you. Thank you. We're now turning to. I'm assuming there's no other on that one. Okay. So we're now moving to planning permit application 2/2019, use and development of 2 dwellings and road opening, Main Road, Chewton. Do I have any objectors to this one? No, the applicant. Okay, sorry. Yes, sorry. I was just checking that I didn't miss someone behind there. No. Okay, so you're
Yep.
You're the applicant.
I'm the applicant. Can I hand up some documents?
Yep, just let
When we're ready. Yep, that's fine.
give me a bit of time to.
There's checks there.
Thank you.
There are 3 stated reasons in the refusal and recommendation before you, and they are all based on subjective interpretations of the clauses. Nevertheless, they are important, and I believe are designed to fulfil the requirements of the policies and the stated clauses. Due to the similarity of the recommendation points and the overlapping nature of them, I'd like to address them as one. The development is very clearly in keeping with State Planning Policy Framework 11.011S, which seeks to promote growth and development within the current township boundaries and limit urban sprawl, as this land is in the centre of town on land that's been a vacant eyesore for nearly a century. At the outset of our decision to develop the land, we went to Council to seek advice about acceptable designs. During that meeting, I made it very clear that we had no design in mind and would build to suit the council's requirements, as they were not for us to live in. The only design stipulations related at that meeting were that skillion or flat roofs would not be approved, nor would large expanses of glass at the front of the building or contemporary box designs. So we designed with these restrictions in mind. During a phone discussion on May 15th with my wife, the officer stated that she would neither be recommending a refusal or approval, so it is with one business day's notice that I've had to prepare for this. Notably, the student community is not backward in coming forward to object to any development, yet there is only one objection to our proposal. I might add, I haven't been forwarded this letter of objection. I feel it's important to state that this is not a large building. It is 12 metres wide by 8.7 metres high under the 9 metre restriction. It is easy when looking at the drawings in isolation to assume this is a large and imposing structure when it is not. It is smaller and significantly less imposing than neighbouring Mo's Antiques. I believe the development adds to the neighbourhood character by filling a gap and thereby giving the township a physical continuity. Further, I believe the style is in the language of the village settlement and responsive to the neighbourhood by the use of weatherboards, a pitched metal roof, a symmetrical design and double-hung windows and large eaves. Please refer to photo number 1, which you've got in there, which our design is responsive to and is a couple of hundred metres east of the property, which has the same pitched metal roof design. Also note this building is just under 12 metres wide, almost the same as our building. Historically, there are many now demolished houses that were larger and of grander scale than our design. I sincerely believe the officer is wrong in her main argument regarding design, scale and character. I believe the development does show the proper regard for the established character, etc. of Tooting, and is not a large and overwhelming building. I'm happy to change the roof product to colour bond and vary the house colour if required. I also agree to amend the ingress and egress as per this road's recommendations and requirements by making a single board access in the centre of the two properties and remove the dividing fence at the front to allow a common car turning across the front of the two properties. Also, what is not shown in the drawings, as I still have to find for a planning permit, drawings is that there will be trees and shrubs planted along the front fence line, which will be chosen after consultation with Parks and Gardens and will hide any cars parked. These houses are to be built in good quality of durable but attractive materials. The scale and form of the buildings are in proportion. There are many other taller and wider buildings in immediate areas such as Mo's Antiques and the chapel opposite, which we've referenced in our design. The only buildings to have this land are the row of fully detached shops known as Circus buildings, which at the highest point reach over 8 metres high and block the view.
Thank you. And thanks for preparing the photos, Henry.
There's much more there, and I know we can get time, and I've added everything in there.
Appreciate that. Does anyone else wish to speak on this one? No? Oh, yes, sorry.
Madam Mayor, Councillors, my name is Brian Hayden. I'm the father of the previous speaker, Mark. Our family has been associated with this area for many years. We bought our first property in the Shire in 1969, and we have 4 sons and a daughter. Three of them live in Melbourne but have properties here in the Shire, and 2 live here in the Shire, and we are very much committed to the welfare of this Shire and making a social contribution. The purpose of the buildings, which Mark has outlined to you, is to provide low rental accommodation of high quality standard for single mothers with children, elderly people, but the emphasis is on a quality development which will put back into the community something which we have gained from living in this Shire. As you'll see from the papers that have been built, the papers that have been laid before you, the application ticks practically every box that there is. And most importantly, it does comply with the state government requirement for infilling housing in areas which are open to development within existing existing townships. The current application it fills all those requirements. The only objection really is the aesthetic one. Does it fit in with Tooting or doesn't it? Well, it's very hard to say what is Tooting. What is the aesthetics of Tooting when you look at all the buildings that there are and you see the photographs with which Councillor have been provided. There is an objection to mention that the lounge room on the ground floor could be used as a bedroom. It would disagree entirely with that. It clearly shows that there is a large double door leading into it as a lounge room, and it is not in proximity to a bathroom. I mean, any room could be turned into a bedroom if you really wanted to, and to say that because that might be a bedroom, therefore we need another car parking space is, I think, a fatuous argument, with all respect to the person who provided it. There are other points in the council papers which are noted there that have been placed before councillors for consideration, but the overall development is, I earnestly believe, and this is based on 50 years of living and being involved in the Shire, a worthwhile project, and one which should be commended and certainly not objected to. In fact, as you've heard, there's only one objector who's not here tonight. We don't know what his objection was because we've not been provided with a copy of that. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. I think that's the only one on the tutor. We're now to the Maya application, and Mr. Ryan, do you wish to speak to this? Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to the Maya application? No. Thank you, Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This matter involves issues concerning the farm zone and the BMO requirements. The farm zone issues I don't think are really very seriously against the applicant here. As far as the BMO is concerned, there is in fact a question about this dwelling being short of space on the south side, and I have some photographs with a diagram on page 2 for to show you, or I can leave a copy there. It shows that there's this tiny segment that is not available on the applicant's own land. However, the provisions of the clause 530204 provide alternative means of establishing defendable space, and they include making use of land adjoining the property where there is a reasonable assurance that that land will remain or continue to be managed in the condition as part of the defendable space. The photographs in this submission to you show quite clearly that it is being maintained in that state. There are a couple of trees there, and there's no understory at all, and there's no reason to believe that won't be the case. It is not required under the planning law that you have to have explicit permission from the adjoining landowner to claim a defendable space next door. It's a question of what is in fact happening next door, and there's no evidence that DSE, who for policy reasons quite clearly do tell all applicants that you can't use our land, that in fact DSE will do anything different on that land than they've done in the last 20 years, and that is leave it the way it is. And the way it is that it doesn't grow anything but the couple of trees that are growing there, and they are compliant. Keeping those trees there is not a problem. Table 6 management requirements for defendable space allow for the keeping of trees. The key thing is in fact understory and litter and build up of fuel for fire purposes. We don't want to lose sight in this particular matter that the key issue really is that we're looking at a person who is actually making use of land in the farm zone. He is actually doing a farm use in this farm zone, and to support that use he wants to live on his land. He can't live next door. To live anywhere else he's going to have to be many kilometres away. So we're supporting the purposes and the objectives of the farm scheme by approving this application. There's alternative means for him to establish the required defendable space, including getting a certificate that in fact his construction standards are a little bit higher than BAL 29, which is really the only reason why he needs a planning permit that triggers the BMO, is that he actually needs to do some work to get the house up to BAL 29. If somehow or other he could have already had it at BAL 29, we wouldn't have even activated the BMO. But yes, honestly, he had to do that. So there are other alternatives available.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's the end of the planning comments, questions. Now, can I have a hands up for other questions? I've got 1, 2, 3. 4. 4? Where's 4? Thank you. Okay, so councillors, I need a notice of motion to extend the suspension of standing orders another 10 minutes, or 15 minutes.
I'll move that motion.
Councillor Trusma, seconded. Councillor Henderson, thank you. Okay, Ms Sanders.
Joyce Sanders, a keen supporter of theatre in Castlemaine. My question tonight is about the Council's arts programme at the Fee Broadway. I've lobbied for a couple of years against the way it has been operating as an exclusively local programme, and I thought it was only me who felt I was missing out on outside theatre productions. But over time, I've spoken to so many locals who've had to travel to Kyneton, Ballarat, and Melbourne to see the small theatre productions that travel around the state. Last week, Gary and Lyndall McClure went across to see a program in Ballarat because it had a local significance. And they told me the show had tried to book into Castlemaine, but had been refused. I went down to Kyneton to see Michael Beach's latest show, which also has a local significance, being about a goldfields doctor who ends up being a long-time Bendigo councillor. Michael Beach told me he had wanted to stage the show in Castlemaine but was refused. Of course, it's important for us to support our local theatre groups. I wanted the Fee Broadway to be made the official home of the Castlemaine Theatre Company. But none of our local groups have enough shows to book the Fee Broadway for 52 weeks of the year. Council's budget says that Fee Broadway revenue is down this year, and of course it is, if we're saying no to everything that isn't local. I live across the street from the Fee Broadway, and I see the darkened theatre week in after week in. Supporting local theatre groups and allowing outside travelling theatre to come in as well, these are not mutually exclusive. Most often the travelling shows are willing to book in on a weeknight, and the local groups don't want the theatre then. And the travelling groups don't carry large numbers of props, and they're often one-man shows, and they can happily operate alongside other bigger local productions who might need to leave their props behind the curtains. It's not as though you have to budget for a better theatre program. These shows pay for themselves with their audiences. I simply can't understand who decided to ban all outside theatre shows, or why they would make a decision like this. It makes no sense, either economically or culturally. Imagine if we tried to run a jazz festival but said we'd only include local musicians. Who would come? Would it bring any tourists at all, or money? Is it not the same thing to say we'll only have local theatre? I need councillors to help me lobby for a return to proper theatre programmes like we've had in the past.
Thank you. Ms Knight, do you wish to comment? She probably doesn't. No.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm actually not involved with the booking of the programs at Fee Broadway. More than happy to take that on notice, though.
So my apologies, Ms Sanders.
Can I just ask, maybe Ms Knight, is it likely that we actually ban groups who are not local from using the theatre?
I'm not in a position to comment on that.
Perhaps I could have a go. That's certainly not the case to my knowledge, Joyce. I'll ask that question directly, but to my knowledge, that's not the reason that people wouldn't be being able to get in there. It's actually, it has been, this council made some decisions about, 18 months ago about how to make the Fee Broadway more accessible for more people, because we didn't have a lot of local people using it for quite a while, and this council considered a new policy which made it much easier to use And it's actually that success, I think, which is meaning it's not available for the people who you're talking about at the times that they want to be in there. Don't quote me on this, that's a silly thing to say in front of the press. My understanding is that there's only about 2 or 3 weeks out of this current year that haven't been booked. The Fee Broadway has not been booked. So it is being very, very well utilised by particularly local people, but that's not with a bias against having other people come in, but more than happy to follow that up and confirm that that's the case.
Thank you. The lady in front, yes, thank you.
Hello, I'm Claire Reynolds. I'm a resident of Butterworth Street in Castlemaine. Tonight there are 7 of us here representing a group who are aware that council is planning, or in the process of developing plans to seal Butterworth Street, Brown Street and Farnsworth Street. We have a petition that we'd like to put to council with 35 signatures. It says, to Mount Alexander Shire Council, we, the undersigned, oppose the council proposition to seal Butterworth Street between Breckleban and Brown Street between Butterworth Street and Farnsworth Street, and Farnsworth Street between Brown Street and Ray Street. Our concerns include increase in speed and a number of motor traffic, leading to increased risk of crashes and increased noise. Also, loss of amenity. We value the character of the area with its semi-rural feel, and the damage to indigenous vegetation, including both big old trees and understory vegetation. I know that we've run a little bit longer tonight, so I think I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you take the petition? Thank you.
Now, can I just jump in and say, representing a rural communities, we would be very happy to see the sealing of some of our gravel roads if the CEO sees fit to swap over.
Ms. Panter, did you wish to speak on this?
My name is Margaret Panter. I'm also a resident of Butterworth Street, and I oppose the proposal to seal the 3 adjoining roads. And I've been having a discussion with various people from the council, so I'd just like to comment on one thing. We've been told that a reason for the road sealing proposal is that there's a safety problem with maintaining the roads, and so we'd like council to find an alternative solution that both increases safety and meets residents' needs. We don't want a solution that only increases safety for road maintenance, but that decreases safety for residents. And my question to council is, will the council work towards a solution that meets the needs of residents as well as increasing the safety of road maintenance? And if I could just comment, make a comment on Councillor Henderson's comment, would you like to swap the roads that you want sealed for this one?
Mine's a bit longer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd just like to comment that it's not in this coming budget that hopefully we're going to approve later tonight for the ceiling. There is design work being done. And that design work, you've quite rightly identified, has arisen because of concerns around maintaining the gravel road and the safety of doing that. However, it will come back before it goes any further, and it's certainly not in this year's budget. So thank you for the work. Okay, Mr. Powers, I think you were next.
Mayor Hans Pass, ratepayer and resident. This question's about Council's implementation of risk management. Prior to responding to the petition asking for the banning of, and I'm going to say Roundup because I can't spell or pronounce the other word. Yes. Prior to responding to the petitioners, did Council seek, in pursuit of due diligence, did Council seek a legal opinion and did council seek a response from its insurer? My concern is that the ratepayers may be exposed to compensation payments in the event that actions taken against the council for continuing to use this chemical.
Thank you. That's a really interesting question. And some of it I know the answer to, some of it I don't, so I'm going to hand over. Is this okay, or should we take it on notice?
I can answer half of it.
And we'll take the rest on notice, if that's okay. So, Mr. Yusufovic, could you take over?
Thank you, ma'am. In answer to the first question, whether we sought legal opinion, no, we didn't, because the product is still a legal product and it's recognised as such within this country. We've also been keeping an eye out on the development so far, so we're well aware of the legal case that's about to start in Melbourne, I think it is. And we've got an internal working group that's constantly monitoring developments with use of glyphosate. But did we specifically seek a legal opinion? At this stage we did not. And in terms of whether we sought advice from our insurer, I'll have to take that one on notice because I'm not 100% sure on that one, but I'll take that on notice and get back to Mr. Parks.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Can you leave your contact details with Ms. Shepherd so that she can get back to you? Thank you. I think that's all. So councillors, could I have a motion to resume standing orders? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Petrusma. Did you get that? It was Henderson and Petrusma. Thank you. Ooh. Now moving on to the business. We're now moving on to page 5, Goldfields Library Corporation. There's a recommendation. Do I have a motion, councillors?
Yes, Mayor. I move that the unconfirmed minutes of the Goldfields Library Corporation meeting be noted.
Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Cordy. Do you wish to speak to this? Oh, is there any objection? No, do you wish to speak to this, Councillor?
Well, maybe I should have done this before I moved the motion, but not really. A regular report comes to us from a body that supplies our library services. However, I am interested in one particular part of the minutes, and I hope maybe Ms. Knight may be able to illuminate it. Section 5.5, service levels IT infrastructure, talks about that the board consider how best to approach the delivery of IT infrastructure and services as we progress planning on the next library plan, and refers to increases in expenditure to improve services to the Castlemaine Library. I wonder if you could shed some light on that particular item for us, Ms. Knight. I know this is much used and loved library.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Castlemaine Library is heavily used, and the board, the Goldfields Library Board, reviews what the usage is right across the 4 councils that are involved in the corporation, and this review has shown that the Wi-Fi usage at Castlemaine has exceeded all expectations, so it's a very well-used library. In response to that, they're having to look at the IT infrastructure. So essentially, the Wi-Fi usage and the infrastructure don't quite meet. So the board's actually seen this as a priority out of all of the councils, the libraries out of all of those council areas, and are looking at the budget implications for Wi-Fi access and improving the connectivity through IT infrastructure. So it's a great outcome for the Shire.
That's good, thank you. And does it necessarily follow on that our contribution will have to increase in future years?
Not to, well, I don't know.
Okay, well, we make the most of it when we can. Thank you as well.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Neiman?
I'm a bit of a techno Luddite, and I use the library, the section here that says library staff making a real difference. They certainly do to me.
Thank you. Okay, no one else wishes to speak?
I just add a quick note there. Apparently the library today was absolutely packed. with the inclement weather, people taking advantage of a really, really good space. And it was apparently virtually full in there. People were either reading, looking at the current newspapers, or probably a lot of them using the Wi-Fi. And I'm one of them, but not today.
Thank you. Anyone else? That being the case, no disagreement. I declare the motion carried. Thank you. Assemblies of Councillors, page 16. There's a recommendation. Do I have a motion? Councillor Gardner, and seconded Councillor Petrusmo. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Gardner?
No, as printed.
Okay, no disagreement. That being the case, I declare the matter carried. Thank you. We now move on to the business. And the first item is resourcing recreation on page 17, PLA 04. There's a recommendation there. Do I have a motion?
Yes, Mayor. I recommend that the Council adopts resourcing recreation, a strategic framework for sport and recreation investment in Mount Alexander Shire.
Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Petrusmo. Is there any objection? No? Councillor Lesser, do you wish to speak to this?
Yes, I do, Mayor. This is a great document, resourcing recreation. Now, this document is all about providing a planning framework that will assist Council in the allocation of resources, as well as enabling a sustainable future in the active communities area. And it brings together a number of strategic documents and welds them into a cohesive recreation strategy. And I'd like to draw Councillors' attention to page 2 of this document. This page is page 2, yes. And it's called, resourcing recreation, a strategic framework for sport and recreation investment in Mount Alexander Shire. And it lists an overarching guiding framework, starting with the council plan, investing in sport and in the local strategies for reserves, investing in play, open space, walking and cycling, and major reserve master plans. On page 3 and 4, you will notice the investment principles. Hold that up again. There's the investment principles. Yes, got that. And and the council will use, that is in the community governance and facility. And on page 4, it spells out in detail how we will implement and resource recreation. And that's this page here. Again, you've got all that. I can show that to the camera. So this is a great piece. And I also want to draw your attention to some of the great action shots on pages 5, 6 and 10. Anyway, okay. Yeah, that's in front. Okay, facts and statistics. Now on page 7, this is a great page of information, and I've spent some time delving into the figures as I'm associated with a number of organisations and Section 86 committees. I'm glad to see that the greater Castlemaine area has been subdivided into the 3 major components, that is Castlemaine, Campbell's Creek and Chewton. But it's not always plain sailing, and on page 14 we have a list of challenges that Council needs to address. But I draw the attention of the councillors to the final paragraph there that says resourcing recreation will provide a critical tool to assist Council to prioritise investment to optimise these assets, ensuring that they continue to service the needs of the Shire community. And that's why I'm recommending this great document, and it's a good read. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Lesser, and also for your photos. Councillor Patrice, anyone else wish to speak? Thank you, Councillor Henderson.
Oh, indeed, Mayor. First of all, I have to compliment Councillor Lesser on his presentation of the document. And also, I'm sure he had something to do with some of those wonderful photographs, because we know Councillor Lesser leads at least a double life, and it's thanks to him we have so many great action shots in our local newspaper on what's been going on in the local sports fields at the weekend. He gives his time voluntarily to take those photographs and has been doing so for many years. Yes, I can remember working hard in council session where the staff, I suppose, well, they sort of corralled us in here and said, right, now you're not leaving until you've made some decisions here. I'm sorry, not decisions. So you agreed on some principles here. And we were sort of, oh, but no, we don't want to do it now. We want to make up our minds for the specific proposals. No, you're going to decide on the investment principles. And the CEO was very stern with us and said, no, okay, come on. What are the most important principles here? We got 3 times, and I think we worked at it hard for about 2 or 3 hours until all our whinging eventually got us a cup of tea or something. But yes, we established that participation was the most important, got a weighting of 20%, and financial responsibility was got a weighting of 15%, and then it goes on multi-use and shared use. So we've got these 9 different ways in which we judge whether a particular proposal for a sporting facility, for sporting initiative, is going to get up, if it's going to get Guernsey in our budget consideration, for example. Yes, I can talk for a long time, right. And now by adopting this, we are actually tying ourselves to this document. It is every time we go, but I want a pump track in Taradale, which I do, I'm going to be presented with this document and say, okay, Councillor Henderson, where does it fit into here? And I'll have to go argue the case. So it's fantastic. It's a great document. Unlike me, it's not wordy. It's easy to follow, and I think it will serve Council well beyond this term into many years of making good decisions, good judgments on where the scarce resources should go for our recreational resources in the Shire. So compliments to the officers for all their hard work, to my fellow councillors for doing the hard yards too.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Neiman?
Just to throw the cat among the pigeons a little, I noticed that there are 58 tennis courts and 25 in disrepair. I think they are a very underutilised resource. And I don't think that's about to change in the near future, despite the events of the last couple of days.
Thank you. That being the case, no objection, I declare the motion carried. I thank you all and the staff for that hard work, and it's comments like our disused tennis courts, I think really indicates why we need these principles. We're not going to get all of those ones back up to scratch because they don't fit the principles. It's a very hard decision making we sometimes have to go through, and this will help us. Okay, we're now going to get to the one that a lot of people are very interested in here, and that's page 21, Eco 17. Planning permit application 234/2018, use and development of the land for an animal boarding facility. Councillors, Councillor Cordy, do you have a motion?
Thanks, Mayor. Motion. The motion is that Council issue a notice of decision to refuse a planning permit for the use and development of the land for an animal boarding facility, dog hotel / kennels, at 9 East Metcalfe Langley Road, Langley, Lot 1 on Title Plan 529584H, subject to the following grounds. 1. The proposal has not sufficiently demonstrated that the use would achieve compliance with the recommended levels as set out in Noise from Industry in Regional Victoria, NIRV EPA publication 1411 2011, or as amended. 2. The proposal is contrary to state planning policy noise abatement at clause 13.05S and land use compatibility at clause 13.07-1S and protection of agricultural land at clause 14.01-1S. 3. The proposal has not sufficiently demonstrated how the amenity of the surrounding area will be protected from noise from barking dogs. 4. The proposal is contrary to clause 22.06 animal keeping and racing dog training and the EPA noise control guideline that both recommend that dog boarding facilities be located at least 500 metres from residential areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cordy. Is there a seconder for this? Councillor Henderson, is there an objection to this? Councillor Lesser, so we have a debate. Councillor Cordy, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Look, we've heard a lot about this proposal tonight. For me, there's three main issues. Firstly, we've heard there's a significant number of objections, it's not just one or two. Secondly, the EPA recommends 500 metre buffer to residential areas. In this situation, we have residences significantly closer than 500 metres. And thirdly, we've got the issue of the rural lifestyle and living and adjacent equestrian facility. So there's a potential for this proposal to adversely impact on the quality of life of adjacent residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson, do you wish to speak now or to...
I'll speak later then.
Thank you. Councillor Lesser, do you wish to speak?
Yes, Mayor. Okay, one of my concerns is that we don't have enough information, and I feel that it's great to listen to both objectors and to applicants when we present it, but I think, from me personally, I think it's a bit unfair that we have to make a decision when there are other circumstances and other documentation and there are questions that we need some answers to. And I feel that this is slightly indicative of there's another application in here which I guess I'll speak the same, because we need to investigate further some of these aspects. Now, one of the things that interests me is that no one has brought up in the objections about the existing dogs, and because I went out there with Councillor Henderson and we had a look at the proposal, and again, this is another thing that that concerns me, that okay, I don't know with how many councillors actually went out to look at the site, to view the presentation and to understand exactly what is going on here. And I think that this is a real problem. And whether the noise, I can't say whether the noise level is yes or no. I know that in the planning documents, if it isn't up to scratch, there's penalties and so on and so forth. But above all, I think we need further information, further investigation before we can actually sit here and make a decision on something that's got such a conflicting amount of toing and froing, because I believe we're in the dark. So that's the sort of, the reason that I'm objecting to get. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lesser. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Petrusma?
I'm actually going to speak to the proposal. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to all the people that came tonight from all sides for having a respectful and interesting viewpoints. But ultimately, having heard all those, we have to make some sort of decision as to what we feel is applicable. And the problem for me is basically the 500 metres. And I'll pick up on what I think it was Julie Lancashire brought up in relation to the 500 metres about a residential zone. And now I believe that should refer to a residential area. And a residential area to me is any place where there's houses within that vicinity. If it purely meant a residential zone, then even rural, various other zones, you couldn't ever consider noise. So my belief is that 500 metres applies anywhere where there are residences, and that's the thing for me. I believe that it is an allowed use, or would be an allowed use in a farm zone, but the 500 metres with residences that are in fact closer than 500 metres is an issue. Now I take on board that there's been an acoustic report submitted to attempt to address that, but there's also an opposing acoustic report to answer that, and I believe the onus is on the applicant to provide the evidence that the site, if built, would in fact comply with that lesser distance. And I don't believe the acoustic report is substantial enough. There's no actual examples of a similar facility with 36 dogs, etc. So I, after having considered all the people that spoke, including the applicants, that I am also going towards at this stage a refusal of the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Trusner. Councillor Neiman, you said you wanted to speak.
I came fairly convinced that 4 legs in this farm zone was a legitimate activity. I'm not so sure now, and I'm a bit with Councillor Lesser. This is a fairly hefty matter. Is there any way we can defer this?
That's not the motion.
Not the motion, sorry. You can ask for that if this motion fails.
Okay, I'll ask for that if the motion fails.
Anyone else wish to speak? Right, okay.
If everyone else is finished. This is I believe it's a very high quality application in terms of its design. I do believe the applicants when they're saying this is state of the art, there's not just dog kennels, etc. The business case for it is very compelling. Certainly if this was to go ahead, I'm convinced that it could make an awful lot more money on this site than if you were, say, grazing sheep. I'm sorry to say that, Councillor Cordy, but it would be a very valuable place. I think it's just in the wrong location. It's dogs barking is just one of the really hard things to tolerate if they're not your dogs. We all know about that, and you know, if we're friends with the next door neighbours and we hear the dogs barking, we think, oh well, there goes Fido, there goes Jack barking away again. It's also very difficult to quantify from a point of view. Acoustic reports are notoriously actual readings, not whether the design will be appropriate, but actually taking monitorings, using noise meters, using sound meters. It's all right if you're using it on a constant noise, like a chainsaw even, or some kind of motor that's droning away. That's pretty easy to measure. But a dog is an explosive sound. A bark is an explosive sound. So there's a sound followed by silence, sound followed by silence. Or if there's a lot of dogs barking, maybe there's not much silence. But what I'm trying to say is the profile is of the sound levels is in a series of peaks. And a noise meter doesn't work by measuring the peaks. It sort of evens them out. So it's very difficult to be able to say, oh, they're too noisy or not. And who wants to be in that situation? Who wants to leave any kind of rural residential zone, whatever our underlying zone might be, whatever it is, a rural residential area? It's if you look at it on Google Earth, you'll see to the north, to the east, to the west, there are much larger properties with very widely scattered true farmland. But just in this area, a little group of residences on relatively small acreages. And who wants to impose a dog kennel on them? It's just not fair. I think it's too great a risk, even though I believe that the applicants would work very hard to minimise the noise. I think it's just too great a risk to approve something like that in this area. I think it's in the wrong place. I think it needs to go somewhere further away from other residences. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Do you wish to have a right of reply? All those in favour of this motion, raise your hands. Against? The motion is carried.
Just have a division just for the sake of recording it next meeting.
No problems. All those in favour, raise your hands. We have Councillor Cordy, Henderson, Neiman, Trusma and Gardner. Against, we have Lesser and Machen. So what that means is we have said no to allowing to this planning permit. What we've said yes to is to issue a notice of refusal. So just to make sure, thank you, Councillor Anderson, that I needed to make that clear. Please feel free to leave as you want. And for everyone, a safe trip home. The kangaroos bounce the other way.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, moving to Eco 18, planning permit application 293/2003, 34 Johnson Street, Castlemaine.
Mayor, I'll move to defer this motion to the next council meeting so we can consider the material and Mr. Josipovic can give us a report on it. So I'll move a motion to defer.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Sorry, Councillor Lesser, was that a yes? Is there opposition to that motion?
Yeah.
Yes. So we now have a debate. Councillor Trusma.
Just fairly briefly, there's been further information put to us tonight by Mr. Ryan for the applicant, and there's only been a couple of days' notice for this to be prepared, and Mr. Josipovic has wanted to take on board or take on notice some of these matters raised in here about whether that constitute works or not. One of the reasons for the refusal is that there's been no progress, but the information provided in the document gives numerous examples of what they believe is progress. So I believe the best thing is to defer it and get some professional advice and bring it back next month and make a more informed decision.
Councillor, yep. Sorry, I'm just having to get my head around who did what where. Councillor Lesser, do you wish to speak to this now or to speak later? You have that option.
I'll speak now. I believe, yes, we've got, again, it's one of these things where we've got further information that needs to be looked at, and I think that would be the right thing to defer it so that we can get the complete facts in front of us.
Who would like to speak against? Councillor Cordy?
Mayor, this application, I have concerns about the application to extend this planning approval. I have concerns about it. In terms of the deferral, I believe that we've been well briefed on the matter, and we're all aware of the particular site, so I don't see any reason why council should be deferring the matter. From my perspective, the planning approval process, there's been a number of extensions and the applicant hasn't progressed the building in terms of having an approved contractor or a current building permit. And I think one of the things I would just point out is that if the extension for this planning permit is refused, then that doesn't stop the applicant developing the site. What they need to do is get their ducks lined up and get the project back on a proper keel, but deferring it and extending the planning permit is not the way to go about it. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak against? I'll go for Councillor Gardner and then Councillor Neal.
Look, briefly. I mean, this obviously it's been going on for 10 or 15 years, depending upon who you want to think. In terms of the new information, so that was provided. If you go through the list, so in the last 1 to 2 years, stuff was bought. Fair enough. There's actually been no substantial work occur. And I appreciate the applicants had issues and this and that. You know, that's just a fact of life, but it doesn't take 10 years to get built up. Unfortunately, I just don't see a need why we would extend it. And really, in terms of the information needing on what's gone on, not a lot's gone on except for buying more material.
Thank you, Councillor Neiman.
6 extensions seems to me to be an awful lot of time. The surrounding area has changed. The other thing that worries me a little, I understand that parking is on Crown land, and if that's the case, will that continue? Could that be used as parking for individual, one of the 7? It does sort of lock it into a full development, and there's only several uses for that. So that's, I think we should refuse to grant the permit and see what happens next.
But we're actually talking about a deferral now, not.
Somebody
Yeah. Just clarifying. Yeah.
The motion before us is
is
Thank
deferral,
you.
not
So,
as granted.
yeah, so the motion that we're debating is whether or not we, in fact, defer the decision or make the decision. So what I've heard is 2 people who want to defer it, 2 councillors who want to defer it.
The motion before us, no?
The motion before us is that this decision be deferred until the next meeting. Is that right?
Yes.
And that was seconded. So that's, yeah. So anyone else wish to speak to that motion? No? Okay.
My right of reply, would.
Yeah.
No one else. Oh, no one else wishes to speak?
Go for it.
No. Okay, just in relation to, I take on board Councillor Cordy's concern about that there hasn't been any progression to the buildings. In fact, probably prior to the changes, and whilst there was still a building permit in place, the buttresses were in fact done according to the list here, the brickwork. But after that, there was a change in relation to, originally this was an owner-built building and the regulations changed, and the applicant could no longer build it as an owner-build. So in actual fact, if there had been any works, he would have done it legally. So he hasn't been able to legally do any work. So I understand your point about not progressing the building, but if he did progress the building, he'd actually
Can I have a point of clarification? So if your motion is to defer this, what information are you seeking?
Well, I'm seeking more professional advice from our director in relation to whether that constitutes, one of the reasons for the refusal in the officer's report is that there's been nothing done. And that's been, the applicant's stating that's not the case, and Mr. Josipovich wasn't able to answer whether he considers that work done or not without reviewing it. So that's kind of the reason behind it, partly from what our director said during public question time. The other quick point, yes, we could just knock this back, and yes, he could in fact just reapply. But to reapply is a far more expensive, and it's been noted already that there has been.
So again, you're debating something slightly different.
Well, no, taking on board what Councillor Cordy said, that he could in fact do that, but that would of course be a much more costly exercise if that was to occur. Where if we considered it in a month's time, we still may in fact refuse, but we would have better information on which to base that on. And that's the other point, that not much was going on. There is a list of things there that have been going on, and I think we need professional advice as to whether they're considered enough to justify an extension to keep going the project, or the next meeting knock it out.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask for a show of hands in support of Councillor Petrusma's motion that we defer making a decision on this application until the next meeting. All those in favour of Councillor Petrusma? It's 2, 3. 3. Those against? 4. So we have decided that we are not going to defer the decision, so we're now I'm going to call for a motion.
As printed, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. As printed, do I have a seconder? Councillor Cordy. Are there objections?
Yeah, I'll object to that.
Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Petrusma, any others at this stage? No? Councillor Gardner, would you like to speak to this?
I think we've done it. I don't think we need to go over it, rehashing. It's been extended numerous times. Yeah, no, that's it really. Go for your life, Dave.
Can I just say that? No one's actually mentioned the difficulty of providing legal access because the access.
You can.
Sorry.
Councillor Cordy seconded it.
Oh,
so
beg your pardon. I thought he wasn't going to speak. There you go.
Sorry, did you want to speak?
Mayor Mason, I would only just comment that there's an opportunity there with the site. The intention with planning permits is people to get on and do what they've put up, what's been approved. Clearly, the applicant hasn't progressed the project for all sorts of reasons. Some of them very good, in my view. Buying stuff and materials doesn't constitute progress of the actual work, and for that reason, I feel it's actually doing the applicant a favour if they go back to square one and rethink what they're doing. Thank you.
Councillor Henderson.
Yeah. I think for me one of the issues is the fact that the access to these developments is on Crown land, and the authority that governs that, the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, can't guarantee a perpetual arrangement for car parking, particularly if the units are sold as separate entities. And I believe the adjacent place that does use access from the back also has access from Johnson Street, which is not the case from this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak on this?
I'll just speak just against the motion. It may well, but I just believe we should. I'm speaking against the motion because I believe it should be deferred just to consider more information. I do believe that purchasing materials, the fact that there's been no commercial builder available to put those materials in is the main reason why they haven't actually been fitted to the actual building. So I would suggest that purchasing very expensive materials and large quantities of expensive materials is in fact progressing it, and the fact that a commercial builder has recently been engaged to actually do it, but that would require us to extend the permit to allow it and also the building permit to be reactivated. So I believe that is an attempt to continue with the project, and it may well be that the information's not enough next month, but I'm only speaking against it because I want them a month to get more information. So it'll be what it'll be.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? No, all those in favour of the motion, which is the motion as printed.
Yeah, stick me in. I'll let it go.
1, 2, 3. So it's 6. Those against? 1. Thank you. The motion is carried. Turning now to Eco 19, planning permit application 2019, use and development of 2 dwellings and road opening, Main Road, Chewton. Councillors, we have a recommendation. Do I have a motion?
Yes, Mayor. I move the recommendation as printed. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Neiman, are there people opposed to this motion? Yep, so we have a debate. Thank you. Councillor Henderson, would you like to speak to this?
The applicant certainly pointed out during public question time the interesting fact that we only had one objector to his proposal, whereas we had a large number to the other proposals, which were deemed to fit the design and development overlay which sits on this land. However, I do believe in this design and development overlay. Originally it was going to be laid over significant parts of Chewton, but it was restricted just to the main road for a very good reason. It's a historic streetscape. It's not a romantic beginnings, it's pretty awful beginnings, digging up the land for the gold and making a terrible mess in the process, but it was very significant historically on a world scale. And so for that reason, whatever has arisen out of that pretty awful time is historically significant and needs to be looked after. And I seem to remember at the time when the Chewton, I forgot what it was called, framework plan or whatever, the design and development overlay, that using the term higgledy-piggledy to describe the main road of Chewton was pretty close to the to what it is. There's no two houses the same, whether it be the historic ones to the left in the main part, or whether it's the those that lie along the rest of the main road, including an old school building that managed to sneak in before we restricted it. So there's all sorts of things there. But the design and development overlay is obviously, to a certain degree, subjective. And if I was, as a layperson, had to apply it, I'd probably make an awful lot of mistakes. But we, in this case, have professionals called planners, town planners, and they are charged with interpreting Schedule 11 of our planning scheme, design and development overlay for East Highway Chewton. And first point is to ensure that any new development has proper regard to the established character, whatever that might be, streetscape, topography, and development pattern of Chewton in terms of, first point, building height, scale, form, siting, building materials, colour, signs, and landscaping. And then to ensure that the scale and form of new buildings is in proportion to the site and does not overwhelm the streetscape and surrounding buildings. To ensure that front and side setbacks of new development is harmonious with existing development. Now, obviously, there's a lot of empty spaces on that particular part of Chewton, but there are over the road houses which have front and side setbacks, and those half-finished buildings that are being put up there conform to the front and side setbacks. The scale and form conform. The building height, scale, conforms. However much you might love those half-built blue boxes. And to ensure that fencing, auxiliary structures and vehicle accommodation areas does not detract from the appearance of the streetscape. And I would claim, as do the planners, that this proposal contravenes those very important points. I certainly applaud the applicant for his desire to provide what would be affordable housing, I believe, for those who are unable to purchase their own homes and need to rent. That's very laudable. However, this is beyond what the applicant's purpose might be. This is a permanent structure and can easily be sold, passed on, inherited, and become whatever. And it's a semi-detached, two-storey building providing, according to this, inadequate setback, inadequate space at the sides to provide what is required in this spot. The applicant has provided us with photographs of houses, this house in particular, the same form, he claims, as his, same width. However, you will, councillors, notice a significant difference. This is a single-storey building, This one The old garage building, of course, is wider, and it even has a parapet which almost takes it up to several stories. However, it is in the historic part of Chiltern. The church could well be considered to be double story. Look at the setback, Till they cut down those elm suckers, you couldn't see it. It was so far back in its block. And here we have the old line of shops used to be there. And another single-story building, single story, albeit on a fairly high position, but this is a sort of replica of the miners' college. So I'm not being presented with any photographs which would in any way represent what's going to be built there. I believe that it would be good to see maybe a building that was accommodated in this way, as it being a semi-detached. However, I think the bulk and form and scale and height is just too much for the site. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Councillor Neiman, did you wish to speak? No? Who wishes to speak against it? Councillor Lesser?
I'm concerned, as I was previously, that again, there's a whole lot of information that we've been landed with. There are no amended plans, but I just point out one clause, and that was to do with the ingress and egress of the cars, and according to Vic Road, it had to be, you had to go in one way and you had to come out the front way, so you couldn't reverse. And I see that in the additional information, and this is my point, that we've got here, that there would be some amendment to the plan to comply with the Vic Road's requirements. So my problem here is again that, okay, so we knock it back, and what happens? And that's the decision. The applicant then could possibly amend all the plans, and what happens? It comes back here again. So again, this is one of those situations where the information that we're given, we don't have a chance to really sit down and peruse it and to get an understanding, even though I can understand why the plan was knocked back. So again, for that reason, to ensure a debate, I just think that we don't have enough. We need more information, and maybe the applicant could amend their plans. So that's why I'm trying to give them some sort of ourselves in some sort of context whereby this may or may not be resolved. But I do understand why the planners have knocked it back, and I understand that part.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Cordy?
Thanks, Mayor Mason. Look, I understand what the family are trying to do with this development, and I commend them for that. I share Max's concern, Councillor Lesser's concern with the Vic Roads access for the existing design, and that's a significant factor in my mind. But in terms of the scale and the discussion around the streetscape, I'm not so concerned about that. In fact, in my view, I think there's probably other design options that could be fitted on the site that sort out the Vic Roads issue that would serve the applicants, and I'd certainly support that. So yeah, it's complex, but I don't think it's in its current form. I could support it. So it's just a bit unfortunate that the Vic Roads issue hasn't been resolved in the present application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Petruisma?
Can I just ask a technical question about Director in relation to this matter, and that is if the Vic Roads requirements and the fact that it didn't comply with the design development overlay, were they those details conveyed to the applicant in advance so that he could amend the application prior to tonight if need be?
I'd have to take that on notice, but our usual practice would be to converse with the applicant, and I've already noted a suggestion that the objection wasn't forwarded, because that is also a usual practice. We'd give it to the applicant. So I'd have to get to the bottom of that, but typically we would always tell the applicant what our thinking is and whether we would be supporting or not supporting a particular application, and offer the opportunity to amend plans. We won't design for applicants, we won't suggest design outcomes. We'll provide the details of what our concerns are, and it's up to the applicant then to provide a design response to those concerns.
Just having regard to that, I think as it's presented, I know I do take on board what the applicant said in his address to council's question time that he was prepared to amend the application, but I think that probably should have been amended prior to tonight, and I can't say whether that's fair or not because I don't know what the details, which is why I asked the question. But the application as presented, I think, doesn't meet the design overlay or the big roads guidelines, which leaves us in a bit of a precarious position in terms of what we do, and I don't think we can approve it under those conditions. So I support the support the motion.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Neiman.
The mention of the traffic brings something up. The car access involves the use of both properties. Are they separate titles? So if sometime in the future one of them wants to go for sale, where do we go?
I know it's unusual.
No, sorry. Thank you. I know it's frustrating, but no.
That's
so
not big roads.
Is that a point of clarification you used to ask Mr. Yusufovic? What happens, the question I think is that if...
Two titles but one driveway. Yeah.
Well, the driveway could be through a common property, or it could be on the boundary line that services both properties. So that again needs detailed design response, which I haven't got in front of me. But there's many ways you can make a single driveway work for two properties that are side by side.
Okay, right, thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you. Would you wish to have a right of reply, Councillor Henderson?
No, I accept that the report does say the Vic Roads have consented to the development, and so actually, paradoxically, I don't see it as a problem here. I believe that there was the planners believe that could be resolved. It's more the just response to the design, to the DDO. That's the main thing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Could I put the motion to the vote, please? All those in favour, as recommended in the officer's report, the motion put by Councillor Henderson. Thank you. 7-4, so it's carried. I suspect you won't be staying to hear about our budget, Mr. Ryan. No more or less, please. So we're now moving on to Eco 20, planning permit application 227/2018 for the use and development of a dwelling at 154 Mai Track, Newstead. Councillors, we have a recommendation. Do I have a motion?
We move to defer.
Councillor Neiman has put a motion that we move to defer. Is there a seconder for this motion? Councillor Patrice.
For purpose of discussion at this stage.
Is there anyone against this motion to defer it? Councillor Cordy, thank you. We have a debate. Councillor Neiman, would you like to speak to your motion?
I've spent some hours with this and talked with various people. I'm concerned that there seems to be a gap between should and must the CFA haven't formally refused. And there needs to be some clarification about that. My understanding is that it is possible for the applicant to meet the requirements of the CFA by submitting it. And I'm also of the opinion that the rest of the recommendations as proposed are actionable by us, but the CFA sort of knocks it on the head straight away. My hope would be that the applicant would get the CFA sorted out, because there seems to be several ways of doing it. So that's the reason for the deferment.
Thank you. Councillor Petrusma, do you wish to speak to this?
Yes. I probably have expressed concern all along about the fact that CFA speak about it not complying, but don't actually object to it. And I think we've got a bit of an issue with referral agencies not wanting to make decisions and leaving them to council who are not necessarily experts in that area. And the CFA is the experts on fire and fire prevention, and they've stated certain things, but they haven't actually said we do not approve of this, we object to this application. And that does leave it open. I think one of the points raised by Mr. Ryan is that on that bell rating, the 32 metres on a site that's flat, a flat area is 25 metres, not 32 metres. And whilst that still goes 5 metres into the adjoining property, that adjoining property, which is dog land, is relatively clear. So I agree with Councillor Neiman that we probably need to resolve a definitive viewpoint from the CFA. If the CFA says no, that's the end of it, that's it. But I think the CFA need to be a little bit more definitive in their decision making and base that on what the bell rating of the property is. And there's some suggestion in actual fact it'll be higher than the 29, and the higher the bell rating on building, the less distances there have to be. So I think we need that sort of information.
Thank you. Councillor Cordy, do you wish to speak against the motion to defer?
Yeah, look, I think the officers have documented their position very well. I think the environmental conditions and the bushfire risk are excessive, so I support the officers' recommendation.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to this motion to defer? No. All those in favour of deferring, please raise your hands. 3. Those against? 4. So we're not going to ask for this to be deferred. Do I have a motion?
As printed, ma'am.
Councillor Gardner, as printed, seconded by Councillor Cordy. Is there any objection?
I'll object on the same grounds I did last time.
Thank you. So you're objecting, okay, thank you. So Councillor Gardner, would you like to?
Look, briefly, I think for me the issues around the fire, and whilst I heard there are alternative ways, the understanding is that you can't use Crown land as a barrier. Yeah, I don't think there's any much more to say about it, really.
Thank you. Councillor Cordy? No. Councillor Petrusma, do you wish to speak against?
Yes, I do. The main reason we seem to be knocking it back is in relation to the fire. And the issue I have is that the CFA don't actually object to it formally. They have stated certain things and given certain information, but they haven't formally objected and said, no, you can't, we don't want this to happen. And I believe it's the referral agent's responsibility to give us a proper answer. It either is suitable to the CFA or it isn't, and I believe it's the advice we've had so far is fairly wishy-washy and not very definitive, and I think it's the CFA that really needs to decide, not councils. I've got no experience with defendable space and fires, well, certainly not enough to decide on this sort of application. I think it needs to go back to the CFA for a more definitive decision on whether it is or is not suitable.
Thank you. Anyone wish to speak for the motion?
What's the motion there?
Printed.
Oh, it's printed. Yeah, I guess so. This is a really hard one. It does say in the report that the Department of DELP advised that the adjoining Crown land must not be included in a defendable space. And so the Minister, Energy, Environment and Climate Change, as the owner of Crown land, for the purpose of the Planning and Environment Act, has not allowed and remains opposed to the use of the Crown land for the purpose of the provision of fire protection measures or otherwise. However stable it might be as a very low fire risk area as seen in photos, though of course after this rain it could actually develop a bit of understory. The CFA well, I think they're not a defining authority, they're a recommending authority, so they can't say thou shalt not, they say you shouldn't rather than you mustn't. But the Minister's saying no, you're not using my land. So in a way it's a must. I think it's would be very risky for Council to grant approval for something like this, where the CFA, as the expert authority, is saying no. I would, however, urge the applicant, if he's committed to living on this land, and I'm sure it's a very nice spot, to get hold of someone who can advise him how his building can actually meet the requirements of Bushfire Attack Level 29 and be where it is, or build an alternative. There's going to be significant changes to the exterior, cladding, the boxing in of eaves, etc., etc. I mean, it's not easy, but I'm sure it would be possible to put something on this land that complied. It just needs to be, structured properly. That would be my advice. But I am supporting the motion. Thank you. To refuse.
Thank you. Can I just have a point of clarification around the role of the CFA as a yes or no?
I should know that, but I'm not 100% clear whether it's a determining or recommending.
Thank you.
I'll take that on notice.
We put clauses.
Can I also just clarify with the Director while he's answering a question about that? It's been suggested that the DNRE land do have a policy where some of their land can in fact be used for defendable space in some circumstances. Are you able to speak to whether that's correct or not?
Sorry, I missed that last bit. Sorry.
So there's a suggestion from the solicitor acting for the applicant that there is in fact a DNRE policy to allow land in farm zones to be used as a defendable space up to a certain level of metres, I believe in some cases 1 metre and other cases 4 metres. Are you able to comment on whether that's accurate or not?
Well, there's certainly provisions in the planning scheme for clearing within 4 metres of fences, etc. But as the report states, DELP will not guarantee in perpetuity that their land be used as defendable space. But there might be some confusion between provisions around clearance of vegetation from fence lines, which you have a right to do within 4 metres of the fence line. But that won't address, I think, the flaws with this one in terms of reaching the BAL rating it needs to.
Yeah.
If I may, I've just found some information about the CFA. It is a recommending authority, not a determining authority.
No.
Thank you. It's good multitasking.
It's good.
So,
Councillor,
what does that mean?
what that means?
Who becomes the determining authority?
Council.
In this case, because we have not had a you must not, they've requested us to become the determining authority on this, which is what the recommendation is. If they had said no, it would have been no.
I quite agree.
Golden Murray Water is a determinant factor.
No.
You say no.
No, I'm being told that's not quite the case. Can I have some clarification?
Definition of reason for determining authority and recommending authority.
The difference?
How the difference works.
Yep.
With their advice.
So if we have a determining authority, so Vic Roads, for example, may be a determining authority when it impacts their roads. Whatever their recommendation is, or whatever their advice to us is, we must comply with.
This is not the case here.
A recommending authority can make a recommendation to council, but council is not obliged to accept it, for want of a better term.
Thank you for that clarification. Does that settle it in your mind, Councillor Newman?
No, it doesn't. But someone's got to make the decision. So I take it then it then means that the council can make a decision on that.
Yeah.
Yes, that's why we're here with this before us. So I have a motion before us, which is as printed. I've had Councillor Gardner speak to it, Councillor Cordy speak to it. Who else is wanting? I've had Councillor Patrusma speak to it.
Against it.
Against it? To it, yeah. So who else wishes to speak to this? Councillor Newman.
We better get used to this because this is going to keep happening all through the Shire. So what we should really do is we, the council, formulate an opinion on how we'll handle this sort of thing. Hence I'm asking for a deferment just to find out. Oh, the other point, sorry mate, I haven't finished. The other point three of the recommendation is the proposal would not support and enhance agricultural production. It already is.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to this? Thank you.
Well, it's pretty simple, really. How much risk do you want to take as a council? As it says here, okay, the CFA are not satisfied in deciding the proposed dwelling can achieve the appropriate bushfire attack level. Okay, that's fine. So they're not saying that's a recommendation, it's not a referring authority, so we become the referring authority, so then we have a risk management situation, so we make a decision, something goes wrong, are we now liable? So it's straight out risk management. And that's coming up again later on about risk management. Yes. And I don't want to lose my council allowance. So that's really the issue here.
I would suggest, and I'm not a lawyer, but I would suggest that if council was to make a decision that's contrary to advice from the CFA, you would increase your risk of liability. That would be my bush lawyer advice.
And I agree with you.
Okay, we're now ready to put this to the vote.
What are we voting for now?
Okay.
As printed.
As printed, are we?
As printed. All those in favour of the motion? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those again? 2. The motion is carried as printed. Thank you. So we're now getting on to how we spend over $40 million in the next year.
Oh, great, thanks.
Page 94, Eco 21, our budget.
Yes.
Councillors, we have a motion.
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to move the motion that, as printed, recommendation that we adopt the budget 2019-2020, prepared for the 2019-2020 financial year for the purpose of section 127 of the Local Government Act 1989, including the adjustments listed in the issues section of the paper.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Neiman. Any objections? Thank you. Councillor Lesser, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, I would, Mayor. I've got an audience of the press gallery and the YouTube
Staff,
and
make
staff
it quick.
and the YouTube audience and
How many people? Yeah, so don't play it up.
so yes, it limits it, but it's an important document, and I have given this a fair bit of thought and a fair bit of understanding, and I know that the councillors will wax lyrical about the budget, and they'll be able to do all sorts of things and say how good it is, and so on and so on and so forth. But I want to take a different approach, and here it is.
It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yes, props. This is the PEG approach to the budget. And the reason that I'm doing this, because obviously I've got a grade 5 or 6 on Thursday, and I've got to explain the budget. And we've always had a problem with how do we explain the budget in a very simple, non-accountancy terms. There are viewers, there it is. And what I've done, and I'll read it out pretty quickly, is our total income is 38.5 million pegs, because I can only measure in pegs, and our capital works has risen from 11.5 to 17 million pegs, which means we've got a 47.5 increase, and we've had to access 6.5 million pegs from our peg reserves, and that leaves us with 8 million peg reserve in our budget. Now, to me, that's the guts of the budget, very simply explained in the format that everyone can understand, is with pegs as the currency. Now, all this is documented on the various pages in the budget document, and my only concern is with our cash reserves, and our cash reserves went down from 14.3 to 7.8 million. But I noticed that in our coming years that we will be expected to raise that average to about just on $12 million. Obviously, we've dipped into the PEG reserve to fund our budget this year. That is obviously not sustainable year after year, but that's what we've decided as a council to do this year. So that's my simple explanation of non-accountancy terminology in pegs.
I don't feel pegged at all, mate.
Thank you, Councillor Lesser. Have you finished?
Yes.
Good, thank you.
No.
Councillor Neiman?
Yes, yeah.
Councillor Neiman, did you wish to speak? No? Did anyone else wish to speak to this?
I will just really briefly. I just want to note that the Capital Works program, we've always got our residents speaking to us about improving our roads, improving our footpaths, and the actual infrastructure in the Shire. And councillors have worked really hard on this budget to try to get a Capital Works increase and make sure that those programs continue. And the things that people complain about most are hopefully the things we're getting fixed. And so I support this budget fully. And I also want to know how Councillor Lester's going to get 38.5 million pegs into the primary school this week.
I don't know either, but each one of these is worth 1 million pegs. So it is actually accurately done, you see. Each one represents 1 million pegs, and that's why we have 38.
Thank
See
you.
that half a peg?
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak to the budget?
Well, I mean, yes, certainly it's a big deal. We've done a lot of work on it. I would really like to thank the staff for being very responsive to councillors' needs, interests, and requests in this regard. I think we all felt that we were being heard in what we thought was important. Of course, the lion's share of the money goes on our operations and keeping the whole place running, paying salaries, because we are a service organisation. We're not just a few machines sitting out there in the depot. We've got a lot of people delivering over 100 services, as we keep saying, and a lot of them go unflagged, unnoticed by the majority of the population. But if we didn't do them, then there'd be trouble. So certainly always encourage people to read the second section of the budget, where it talks about the different service areas and how much money is going onto it. So You know, if we look at something like, I'm sure Ms. Sanders will be very excited about to know that venue coordination and events is going to have 677,000 spent on it this year, with a revenue of 37,000. So there's a net cost to council of 640,000. So there's a lot of money going on there. Youth development, slightly smaller, you know, 159,000 with a bit of income from the state government. So those things are all documented there. But of course the glamorous stuff is our capital works, and we've got a very, shall I say, a large capital works this month, and we'll be watching anxiously the graph in the quarterly reports to see how we're keeping up with the actual expenditure, with the budgeted expenditure on capital works, because unlike companies that are trying to make money and avoid expenditure, our job is to spend it. To spend it. All that we've committed ourselves to must be spent on the works, otherwise we've failed. It's no good if we go, hey, we've still got 8 million left in the bank at the end of the financial year. No, it should all have been spent on what we said we were going to spend it on. So we've got, what, $16.5 million in capital works coming up, compared to, I think, just a couple of years ago, we only had 8 million. And that's a good news story. We've attracted extra money in grants, government grants, and that's going to fund, and of course, to match that, we have to bring money from our reserves to make use of the great opportunities we're getting on more work on our roads, more work on our bridges and our footpaths and trails and our community buildings and so on. All the stuff that services our community and provides with the what we've come to know and expect in this great part of the world. So, great budget. Looking forward to seeing it all being spent. Thank you.
Councillor Cordy.
Yes, Mayor, just briefly, I'd like to acknowledge the work of Carolyn Ross, the Executive Manager of Corporate Services, but also our directors and the CEO for the work that's gone into the budget. It's a extremely comprehensive and well put together budget, and yeah, I'm very proud to be here and part of this council, and I think it's going to be a fantastic program of works. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? That being the case, I declare the motion carried, and I reinforce that thank you, and also the good news story that a quarter of our capital works is being funded through grants. That's a magnificent achievement. This is the largest capital grants work we've done since the floods, and so this is actually now going on things that are not urgent in terms of the floods work. This is all work that's going on what has been identified through our asset management plans, also through our opportunities from the grants, through our beautiful council plan, which is still guiding everything that we do. So thank you to the councillors for the hard work that we've also done on this. It's been a long 6 months haul of making this work, and I've really appreciated the cooperation that everyone, officers and councillors, have shown. Thank you. Fees and charges, councillors, page 100. That's a good point. I think I said it was carried. There were no objections and it was carried, so let's just confirm that. Thank you for picking me up. Okay, fees and charges. Page 100.
I'll move as per recommendation and motion.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Gardiner. Any objections? No. Do you wish to speak to this, Councillor Petrusma?
Only that it's part of the budget, and it sort of goes hand in hand with the budget, and increases have been, the budget was kept to the government set limit, and we've tried to keep our fees and charges to the minimum rise as possible. There's only a couple of very rare exceptions in there, but the vast majority of it is fairly minimal.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner, do you wish to speak to this? No? Councillor Henderson, you're chomping at the bit?
Yes, Mayor. I've been holding my peace. You know, I'm not going to knock back these fees and charges, but I do have actually a query for, I think it's Mr. Yusuf, isn't it, about roads and council land, and there is, no, wrong one. So we've got environment, an application to camp on council land, public land and private land, per day, $46. Do we actually, if someone puts a tent up in their backyard, are they going to get a permit?
Only if they're doing it for commercial gain.
Ah, oh, so it's like Airbnb, sort of Castle Main style. Right. Okay. Fair enough. Because it's going up 45.7%. I see, that explains it. Thank you, I wasn't worried about that. But I have to say that I was rather saddened to see that our parking fines are going up, at 9.2%, unlike most of our fees are going up, 2.5%, which is the rate cap. The government, that's the rate at which the government expects us to increase our charges to the public. But not everyone can sort of shrug off an $83 parking fine. I think that it's getting up there. It used to be not so long ago $60. Last year it was $76, and now it's $83. And I would caution fellow councillors not to allow this. Okay, so it's a 0.5 penalty unit, but we don't have to go with 0.5. We can go with 0.2, or we can just have none. I don't see why we should impose this. I think for too many of our local residents, that's a significant hit, and a parking fine is, well, is there anyone in this room who hasn't ever had a parking fine?
Yeah, I haven't.
Oh, really? Oh, I'm going to go hang my head in shame now. I've never had a speeding fine, I've never had a road infringement, but I have had a parking fine. Okay, mainly for my children, but there you go, they drive my car.
So can I be clear, you are not arguing against
No,
this?
I asked the question and I'm just commenting that I'm not too happy with it.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this?
Can I just clarify the point? This is my motion. The 9.5% on the parking fines is not, in fact, set by council. We still have the same number of units we've always had. That's a state government set increase, not our council set increase.
We're not said we don't have to choose that percentage.
Thank you. This is not part of the debate.
Thank
you. This is not part of the debate.
That's government.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this? No, that being the case, there being no objections, I declare the matter carried. Page 104, the March Quarter Financial Report. We have a recommendation. Do I have a motion?
No.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Do I have a seconder?
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Lesser. Is there any opposition? No. Councillor Henderson, do you wish to speak to this?
Only to say that I am keeping an eye on the capital works to reporting date. Now this is to the end of the third quarter, and the familiar sight of the graph of actuals falling behind the budget is there. I see we've got actual including on order, gives a more starry-eyed view, but we've I just want to maybe ask the CEO, as he's the one who has ultimate oversight on how things are going on capital works, how he feels about the what is it, the light blue line, yes, with the crosses on it. Do you want to make any kind of predictions of where it's going to end up at the end of this month?
I can give you a broad prediction about it. There are a few projects that you know about that are significant, have got significant funds attached to them, such as the rehabilitation at the landfill. That's got a lot of money you've set aside in the budget for that project, and that hasn't proceeded for good reason, as you know, related to the negotiation we're having about the standard that is required at the landfill. So it is one of those things, absolutely, if you measure the numbers there as an example, that project is not going to be done at the end of this year, and we believe that that's a good result, because we're working really hard to make sure that we only have to do the appropriate rehabilitation on that site that properly protects the environment, as opposed to simply adopting a standard that makes no sense in our view. So there's a few examples like that, and there are some that we wish were more progressed than what they are, and they're not. But you'll certainly see at the end of this financial year that the Capital Works program will be substantially complete.
Thank you. Councillor Lesser? No? Does anyone else wish to speak to this? No? Thank you. That being the case, I declare the motion carried. We're now on to the procurement policy.
I'm happy to move this one. Mere motion.
Thank you. As printed?
Sorry, as printed, yes.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Gardner, thank you. Any opposition? No. Would you like to speak to this, Councillor Shrewsbury?
Just to note that this is yet another government mandated thing that we have to do. It's got to be done before the financial year ends, and that once a year council must adopt a new procurement policy, and this will be our incoming new procurement policy as required by state government.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner, no? Does anyone else wish to speak to this? No, that being the case, I declare the matter carried. I'd like to point out that this might come back to us later in the year, because we haven't yet got finalised our considerations around the Aboriginal procurement strategy, nor I think the social procurement. They're very hard things to get right in a procurement policy, so we're still working on getting those right, and it will probably come back to us. But we had to have this tabled by the end of this financial year, so that's why you've got it before you now, noting that they will come back to us for consideration later. So thank you for that. We're now moving on to page 111, the audit and risk. Advisory committee meeting.
I move that we adopt the recommendation as printed.
Thank you, Councillor Lesser. Is there a second for this?
No, I'll second it, Ben.
Thank you. Any opposition? Okay, do you wish to speak to this, Councillor Lesser?
Yes, I do. Just briefly, Mayor mentioned. I think it's coming up this month. It will be my first audit and risk committee, even though I was just a visitor last time. And there's just a couple of lines here that I want to highlight on page 115. And it's about the charter of the audit and risk, and the main objective of the committee is to assist council in discharging its oversight responsibilities. I think that's fairly important. And it also says in performing its duties, the committee will maintain effective working relationships with council, that's us, management, and the external and internal auditors to perform their roles effectively. And each member of this committee is expected to develop and maintain their skills and knowledge, including their understanding of council, of the committee's responsibility, and of council's business operations and risk. And it needs to be also noted that the committee is an independent advisory committee of council established to section 139 of the Act. So it's great to have this charter and to spell out the responsibilities of the members of that committee.
Thank you. Councillor Shrewsbury, do you wish to speak?
No.
Anyone else wish to speak?
I think this is the first time that the Audit and Risk Advisory Committee minutes have come to us for a formal report. It's good to see the raising of the profile of this very important committee. I think in my early days on council it was a closely guarded secret. And certainly it's never appeared in the minutes of any council meetings that such a thing existed. But and then the minutes started being reported on, and now they've got, I mean, it's part of our committee reports, I think, and now it's actually got its own report, which is, I think, giving it the correct status. And so any matters of concern to the Water and Risk Advisory Committee are made public and are able for councillors to debate, should we wish to, in relation to the recommendations made.
Thank you. There being no opposition, I declare the motion carried. I think it's important to note a couple of changes to the Audit Committee Charter, in that they are going to be emphasising strategic risk and workplace risk and safety, and really considering those issues. And which is a really good segue into the next item on page 130. But before we get to that, I see that what we have just in the last very short time said how much we're going to spend, how we're going to collect some of the revenue, how we've gone in spending our previous budget, how we're going to manage with all degree of absolute correctness in our tender procedure so we can't be held up, and that we have an Audit and Risk Committee that oversees us. This is a bundle of really good decisions that we're making, and I'm really grateful that we're doing this. So thank you. So, turning to page 130.
Yes, Mayor,
Thank you.
I move the recommendation as printed.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Oh, sorry, did you wish to change it?
No, it's fine.
Is there a seconder for Councillor Lesser? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Is there any opposition? Do you wish to speak to this?
I do, Mayor. Yes, briefly. Well, I've got to be responsible. I'm going to be on this committee. Okay. Briefly, as the executive summary says, as the governing body of the organisation, the council is ultimately responsible for managing the risk for the organisation, and the council has an important role in managing financial risk, reputational risk, in relation to its interactions with important stakeholders such as government. And when I come to the next meeting, I will be flagging the risk management concept of the reserves to enable a sustainable future. As I noted previously in the budget, that we need to just keep an eye on the reserves that going forward into the future. And so that is I sort of realise that could be a risk concept. And so that's part of being financially responsible, is to make sure that our reserves are sufficient to cover our needs.
Thank you.
I thought you were talking about our recreation reserves.
No. Okay. So, Councillor Henderson, do you wish to speak to this?
Oh, well, no, I don't. Just, yeah, look, this is far beyond what we've ever seen before.
Yes.
Enterprise Risk Management Action Plan. Whoa! No longer is a little bit sort of risk management happening on this project and this particular work team, a little bit of prep work. Oh, yes, and we get a little section in a council report or a briefing report. Oh, yeah, risk management for this particular issue. This is Enterprise Risk Management Action Plan for the whole organisation. It's lifting it to a whole other level. I'm not a great fan of having to watch out for risks and possible mitigation at every turn. I think it's certainly dampened down a whole lot of good things in our society. In fact, we're all scared of risk. But some risks are serious, including risks to life and limb and people's human happiness. So I think that overall this is a very good thing. Well, certainly from a council perspective we have to do it. And I've noticed that all the actions have to take place in the next 6 to 9 months. So it's not a long-term document. I guess once this is completed, there'll be the next lot. And somebody set themselves up with a lot of work to do, and I think she's probably capable of it. So it's good to see it.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak?
Can I just note that one of the things in here is environmental risk, which talks about management of landfill operations, which is one of our major risks, and it was brought up earlier in the public meeting, use of chemicals and products that can be harmful, and those are under constant supervision, and I know there's a lot of concern in our community about some of those, but it will be continually monitored, and now we have a formal process in which to continue to monitor it, and if it becomes too much of a risk to the organisation, we'll certainly be notified of it, and I'm sure there'll be some actions taken.
Thank you. That being the case, any other person? The motion carried. We're now moving on to delegates' reports. Is there anyone who wishes to report on any? I actually do want to report on the Modern Mallee Regional Waste and Resource Recovery Group, to which I'm a delegate, and the little bit that's happening in the waste scene at the moment. Now, I'm sorry, Councillor Gardner, but it is actually important. I don't know if you've read the VAGO report on waste policy, which basically said we're currently operating in an almost policy-free environment. And they've come along with a huge number of recommendations, none of which apply to the government. So we have been the poor bunnies who have been desperately trying to make things work in a poor environment. There has been inquiry which we've responded to, and yet there's now another inquiry from Infrastructure Victoria. How many times can they ask us what we need to do on waste when they don't have any really good policy in place? So that was my little bit of temper tantrum around waste issues and how we cop it. Okay, we also have the meetings by the CEO and the Mayor. I think Councillor Petrus added them up and I won, However, not in terms of importance. Chief, would you like to?
Thanks very much, Mayor. Happy to answer questions as always, councillors. If I may just indulge before I talk about this report, thank you for all of your work on the budget process. We said this a few weeks ago when we had the draft out, but I do sincerely thank you on behalf of all of the staff. You put in an immense amount of time, you had fantastic debates, and you made lots of decisions that we needed in a really timely way to be able to get it through to tonight. So thank you very much for all of the work that you put into that. We very much appreciate it, and again, thank you, Councillor Coy, for noting particularly our new manager of corporate and community services. Corporate services. We've just changed the title. Our new manager of corporate services, Carolyn Ross's efforts for that budget. She literally did a two-person job by herself with fantastic support from her director Lisa and the rest of the organisation, but when it comes down to it, someone's got to sit down and churn through the numbers, and she did a phenomenal job of that. So I really do say thank you very much to Carolyn on behalf of the whole organisation, and thank you for also appreciating that work. Two matters that two meetings that I wanted to bring to your attention. The first one, which was a meeting with, which was assisted by our great partner in Brian Wesley, who's the acting director of Northern Region for Vic Roads, assisted us with having a meeting with Paul Northey, who's the Chief Regional Roads Officer, which is the CEO of the Regional Roads component of Vic Roads now, as well as a senior roads advisor to Jarl Pulford, who's of course the Minister for Roads. Myself and Director Josipovic spent about an hour and a half with them, where we spoke most of the time. It was a terrific meeting from our point of view. They had great interest in what we had to talk about, and just to note the matters that we were able to talk to them about. The Building Our Regions program, that's one that had huge benefit to our council in the past. It was a discretionary type program that allowed regional directors of Vic Roads to be able to sit down with us and say what's important in our community, where we can put in a bit of money together and get some things done that will otherwise not get done because of all of the rigmarole that you often have to go through to prove the value of projects, and is always more difficult in the rural and regional areas than it is in the city. So we talked about that program because it's missing at the moment. we really want to see that program come back, and it was great to have a chat with the Minister's senior advisor about how important that program's been to us to get projects done. You've been able to do a number of projects in the last couple of years because of that program, and at the moment the rest of the list is just sitting there waiting to happen. So that was a great discussion. Fishing Country Roads, that's one of the fantastic programs. We in that program, part of the reason why you've been able to do the budget that you've just done is because of the success we've had in the Fixing Country Roads program. We actually got more money than any other council in this region, I think, Director Josipovic, under that program, including Bendigo. So it's been an enormous success for us. To about $2 million, I think we attracted from that program.
Touch under 2 million, yeah. 1.9 something.
Pedestrian upgrades was a really great topic of discussion with them. I think every one of you has at least one or two pedestrian crossings that you'd love to see done out there in the community. It was great to have a chance to impress upon the Minister's advisor the gap that there is in funding for such things, and I think there's a great amount of appreciation for a need to do something about that. We'll keep pushing and we'll see where we go with that, but we've got a very good ear to an argument that we put forward of an unintended consequence of our terrific and needed highways through our towns is we've got people who can't get across them safely, and we need to do something about that because it's not what we want to have happening. It's separating communities. Talked about a small town development program, and with that some of the initiatives that Vic Roads has got coming up that we'll start to see coming through. Procurement partnership opportunities, again we've been trying to find ways to work closely with other councils for procurement purposes to get a better deal basically. Vic Roads is equally interested in continuing to look for opportunities to do that with us, so that was great to hear. We talked a lot, Mayor, about waste management and recycling. Vic Roads is absolutely passionate about trying to find more and better ways to recycle products, to find new products, and also to make better use of the things that are currently going to the tip far too often. And we talked about gravel road management and the opportunities that might lie there for us to do some more work together. So it was just a terrific meeting that I thought was worth mentioning there. We do enjoy a great relationship with Vic Roads, and we're seeing a lot of benefits because of that, I think, in our region. The other one I quickly wanted to mention there was it's kind of related. It talks about myself attending the Healthy Heart of Victoria meeting. I sit on the steering group for that. One of the initiatives of that group, as you know, is the active living census, and I just wanted to again promote, please everybody, get your census filled out. 16th of June is when it normally closes off. We'd really love to see people filling that in, either online or the hard copies that everyone hopefully in our community has got at their homes now. It does take 15-20 minutes to get through. There are a lot of questions. They're really important questions for us to help understand what do we need to do to do better for our community to all live more healthy and more active. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. One last thing, we had a 3.5 hour meeting with the Judge of Warang, who wanted to talk to us about having a treaty with us. They've got 11 local governments in their area, and they're trying to establish treaties with all of them. How that works, they don't know. How it works, we don't know. So this is part of that early discussion. It was a really interesting meeting, and I'd like to draw people's attention. I'm not going to be able to pronounce it correctly, but it's Delkunya Ja, which is the Jajawarang Country Plan 2014 to 2034. It's a beautiful document that's really clear about what they want. It's something that we have to be very aware of as part of the Regional Settlement Agreement. We have a lot of legal requirements that require us to work with the Jajawarang, and so it's very good that we can have these discussions without pressure to arrive at a way of continuing to prove the really good relationship we already have. Thank you. No more questions? That being the case, no. Everyone wants to go. I declare the meeting closed at 9:26. Thank you.